We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H., and this week I'm here with
Lee Overstreet, long-term pinch hitting right now as things are tumultuous and unknown and a little bit weird. Happy to be here again, though, Rob.
Indeed. So yes, speaking of little bit unknown, I just let Lee know moments before we press the record button for this episode that I have an update from Tom. And
Yay.
Not just in terms of he relayed things to me that I am now going to say to you. No, Tom and I managed to get onto a video chat. He commandeered his son's computer that he brought along when they evacuated, and he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna record a little bit here." And so Tom needed to talk through some things, and rather than me relaying it to you, third party, we're gonna let him say it in his own words. We're gonna insert about a half an hour that Tom and I recorded prior to Lee and I recording this episode. And so we're going to go ahead and get the update from Tom right now. Alrighty, well, look who we have here. I wasn't even necessarily expecting video, but that is very good because we have proper proof of life. It's not just an AI voice generator. I wouldn't know how to AI generate all of this.
I don't know why anybody would want to AI generate my voice anyways, but yes.
Goodness gracious, here is Tom on the podcast. Obviously, we're not doing an entire podcast with Tom. This is an update that Tom can let us know how the heck things are going. How are you, Tom? It's so good to see you.
Yes, so as many of you know, there's been a couple of hurricanes that went like directly through my hometown.
Yes, they did.
But the town in which I live.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of just say, first of all, thank you for the support, the letters of support, the emails, the notes, the donations to PayPal, that sort of thing. All of that, I really appreciate it. And it's all my wife. I showed her, and actually go through every email with her, but I showed her like the unread number of emails at the time. Right. I opened it up and I said, you see all these are all from my listeners who are sending well wishes and, thinking about us. And this was, of course, right after Helene, when I got all of those. And she teared up and it was very emotional. So I want to thank every one of you that did that. Let's just talk a little bit about what happened. So, it's very hard when you're online and you're far away from a thing to understand exactly what's going on in these places. So I see a lot of comments from, and I'll just address those right away, from people who are like, well, if you live in low-lying areas, you get what you deserve. Yeah. You must have enough money. If you have enough money to live there, you have enough money to rebuild your house, which is, of course, a ludicrous thing to say. Nobody has enough money to rebuild their house from scratch. If they do,
I don't know where you're seeing those comments, but that's
I see them.
That's
I
terrible.
Do. Not to me personally, but I see them online, and I do want to address those specifically. Most of the people who are affected by Helene, their houses have been there for 50 plus years. Have never seen a drop of water, and through climate change or everything else that's going on in the world, storms are getting worse and worse. But they're like 2 storms in 2 weeks. That seems unusual. That seems some people think man-made. Of course, those people are crazy. But
if we had the ability to do that, we wouldn't have an energy crisis.
That's right.
That makes no sense. But yeah, the path that Milton took is very unusual. There was a storm many decades ago that took a path like that across the Gulf of Mexico, but that is an unusual hurricane path.
If you look, when I first moved to Jacksonville, like the first year I was in Jacksonville, there were 3 storms that went through Tampa and into Jacksonville. I think it was 2004. And what do you need, son? Okay, thank you.
It's good to know some things haven't changed.
Yes. I haven't been home. Why wouldn't he? There might be some noises from people walking on the roof because during Milton, this house also sustained some damage that I am in. So,
okay.
So we had 3 storms go through this area and up, and everybody was freaking out. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. But of course, there wasn't the kind of widespread flooding that we saw through Helene. Helene was just insane. It was the highest that I think we've seen since 1985 was the last storm that was a little bit higher than that. And there was a storm like in 1890 something or something that was much, they think much higher than that. I don't know how they get those numbers from 18 whatever. But so, it's very hard to, when you live in this area, to understand, the thought process. You're like, why didn't people leave? Because I had neighbors who didn't leave.
Didn't evacuate, you mean?
Didn't evacuate. They just stayed home. And it's very hard to understand that unless you've been through the number of hurricanes we've all been through. And they're showing you the numbers. They're showing you the numbers. And I saw the numbers, and I'm like, okay, this looks like it might be worse than Adelia. And I remember in Adelia, we had like just a little seepage of water from the corners of our houses. So I'm like, it might be worse than Adelia. So that means I might have an inch or two of water in my house, and that would be bad. But it's not going to be the end of the world to pull up some baseboards. You might have to pull up a little bit of drywall and
carpets, of course.
But it won't be the end of the world. But we evacuated because that's the right. I don't want to sit there with water all over my floor.
And there was a full-on evacuation order
that
was in place.
And so we went to a hotel, a local hotel that is nice and high and dry.
No, this is Helene that you're talking about.
This is Helene, yes. And we kept watching the weather. I'm like, ooh, this is it's pretty high. We might have. I was still thinking there was a chance that that it might have spared our house. But we got, if you measure the water line on the outside of the house, and remember, the water line is where the water settles. So the water actually goes up higher. Yeah,
because it's sloshing as it
goes up higher. Yeah, and then it settles back down, and that's where the water line stays, and then it starts to recede. Yeah. And that water line on the outside of the house was 45 inches from the ground.
Oh, it was that high? Okay, yeah. I mean, we showed the couple of photos that you shared on Facebook publicly, and I was estimating that was about like 3.5, but it was even a little bit higher than that. Yeah.
And then inside it was 28 to 30 inches because the house is actually higher than the outside. So, but they're going to cut 4 feet of drywall throughout the entire house. We evacuated. We took, we raised everything up high. We thought, higher than at least as high as we've ever raised things. Yeah. And it just almost nothing was high enough.
Yeah. Completely inadequate for 3 feet high water. Yeah.
You look around your house with a tape measure and go around.
Yeah.
To it's actually because they're cutting 4 feet of drywall, so just do 3 feet, 36 inches. Go around 1 meter for all of my overseas, and just hold it up to everything you own, and realize that everything. Almost
beds,
everything you own
chairs,
is 3 feet.
Coffee tables,
So, we were very fortunate. My cycling community and my wife's friend community and work community, like the weekend after the storm came in, and in one day we got all of our furniture out. We got the floors cleaned off, because remember, in a flood like this, you're not just dealing with flood water, you're also dealing with sewage, because
this is post Helene we're talking about. You had all these friends come in and help you clear things out of your house.
That's right. And they, so we've got sewage build up, back up, and stuff like that in certain rooms, especially bathrooms that has contaminated everything. So even the stuff that you're like, oh, well, I could just dry it off and it'll be fine or whatever. It's been contaminated. So if you can't deep clean it, which means, and then it costs money to do that, like a lot of money.
Yeah, because this is remediation at this point, not just drying and restoration.
So we got all the water out of we got the water out of the house. We got the floors dried out. We got all the furniture out and all the stuff out on the curb, basically. And then the friends started knocking out drywall up to about 3 feet.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit higher in some rooms. And then over the next couple of days, me and my wife did more drywall. We basically got almost all the drywall we could. But then, you're just like, okay, now where are you going to stay? Because 90, like, it's not just my neighborhood. Usually these things happen as my neighborhood is like the one that's most impacted. People are like, oh, it's terrible. We don't care about them that much. Because a lot of people are rich that live in my neighborhood, but they're not. Nobody's that rich. I mean, there's very few people that are that rich that are like, oh, I lost everything I own. I'll just go to IKEA and get a new life. So we're staying with family. My wife's brother and his wife live here in town, and they live in a neighborhood that's pretty high. So we moved in with them, but we can't stay here indefinitely.
Of course not.
So we're like trying to figure everything out, and not only that, but like, okay, well, you got the stuff that didn't get affected because it was high enough, and the stuff that you could save. What do you do with it? You can't leave it in the house because the remediation is going to come in. They're going to knock out all the drywall. They're going to have to dry everything off. They had to do all this construction. They can't have all this crap in your house. So you have to find a storage unit. Guess who else is looking for a storage unit?
Right.
Everybody in Florida is looking for a storage unit. The closest one we could find was 45 minutes away. So, we had to rent a truck, and we loaded the truck up with everything that we had. And we went to drive it over there, and the storage unit place is out of power, so we couldn't get in. It was just like, there's one thing after the other. And then, like Rob said, this unusual path of Milton where it jumps from the Pacific to the Gulf.
Yeah, like going straight east is
it's
unusual.
Just like, hey, Tampa, I heard it's fun over there. I heard you guys are having a good time. So it came straight at us.
Yeah.
And so then we went from, okay, our lives are starting to get back to a little bit of normal. We're trying to figure out the smaller things. And then now we have to quickly prepare our house for another hurricane.
Well, and it's not just you. Like, obviously, everyone else in your neighborhood, they also would have tried to get their belongings and damaged materials of their house out of the house. Not like a hurricane is coming. That is debris. It's already bad enough with if you didn't have everything that used to be inside everyone's house, outside everyone's house. All of that stuff is now outside of everyone's house. Like, the amount of just flying debris, I can't even imagine.
So we knocked down all the drywall. We just kind of left it in the house, and we're like, I don't know what to do with this. We're just going to knock it down and leave it here, and then we'll back it up later or something. But many people took it and scooped it up and threw it in the big pile in the front yard.
Yeah.
Because they will come back and get it. I didn't want to do that because I've seen these things happen before, and you end up with them picking up as much as they can with this big claw thing that comes down. But they can't get everything. So you end up with this like drywall paste in your front yard that you have to kind of dig up and stuff. I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I didn't have that, but there was a lot of this stuff around that everybody's freaking out because they're like, oh my God, these massive piles of debris. And it's not just my neighborhood. It's all the beaches. It's all the low-lying. I mean, there was over 6 feet of storm surge in our area. It's worse in other places. But and that's what I'm saying. This entire state is just like ravaged by this thing. And now Milton's coming in with 100-mile-an-hour plus winds, which is what we had in this neighborhood, this area. And where everybody's worried about the amount of debris that's going to be blown around. Fortunately, in the end, there wasn't that much. Like, the debris did not move as much as...
Yes, because I have not heard what happened from Milton. No. I really don't know what happened to you guys, Milton-wise.
So, I was expecting the house to be, like, all the windows to be broken and things to be thrown inside the house and everything else. But like I said, the debris piles kind of stayed. They moved around a little bit, but they all kind of stayed. Everybody was shocked. Yeah. I thought they were going to need a bulldozer just to get back into the neighborhood.
I was picturing like, basically 3-foot-long bullets because.
But it did blow down a tree.
Okay.
And it blew down a tree on top of the house, which is fun for me. So now I've got roof damage. Let me see if I got this.
Yep, no kidding.
Oh, well, let's try to show it on the. Let me see if I can show that on the.
Yeah.
Can you see that? You probably can't see that. I will send it to you, Robin. I will send it to you. You can put it up there.
Yeah, we'll
put
it
in. It's a picture of the tree. The tree is. I've heard it called a couple different things. A Cuban laurel. I've heard it called a rubber tree. I've heard it called a bunch of stuff. But basically, it's like this multi-trunk thing that came together, and it was real big. And we knew that the tree wasn't in great shape, but we, we've had it trimmed back so that all the limbs aren't over anything really. And so it wasn't really it's like in our side yard off to the side. Well, it blew it in the right direction and it landed on top of my bedroom, basically. Okay. So now we have roof damage on top of that. So now that's a different. So we have flood insurance and homeowners insurance, and homeowners. And so it's two different deductibles, of course. That's fun. But the homeowner insurance takes care of the wind and that sort of thing. But the flood insurance takes care of from Helene, the water. Okay. And it's been hard. Let's just say.
No kidding.
So where are we at now? It's basically the contractors that we were talking to before Helene, who we lost contact with because everybody was dealing with Milton coming in, and then we all lost power.
Everybody lost power, and water and sewage service for a few days too, right?
Sewer service was about a little bit less than 24 hours, which was not that bad. It might have only been overnight, really. But they shut those down because my wife works for the city, and she works at one of those plants in a different capacity. She doesn't actually work at the plant, but she knows the people there. And basically, during Helene, one of the water treatment plants flooded, and so in the electrical stuff that's there was in danger of being wet or got wet or something. And they had to send people out in like waist deep water to go turn everything off and then evacuate. They couldn't go in there and get them because they had no way of getting to them. So they had to walk out in this not clean water.
No kidding, yeah.
And so when Milton came, they said, listen, we can't do that. That's that's not safe. We can't do that. So when it gets close, we're going to shut down these plants, evacuate everybody. And then when it's safe to bring them back in, we'll bring them back in, assess if there was any flooding. And if there wasn't, we'll just turn everything back on, which is not as easy as flipping the light switch, but you get the sense. So there was no flooding with Milton, luckily, in our area. So we ended up, they were able to turn it on fairly quickly. So I think they turned it off the night before. And then by, the afternoon of the next day, the sewage came back on. But we just came off the boil water notice yesterday morning, which was Monday.
Right.
So that was like the entire weekend of boil water, while fully, anywhere from 3/4 to 1/4 of St. Petersburg still does not have power. So depending, like the beginning, almost everybody didn't have power. Yeah. And then now they're like...
So how do you boil your water? People literally lighting fires? I don't know.
It's crazy, some of the things that... not that they can do anything about that, but you quickly realize how hard it is to do things when you're like, oh, I'll just use my, I've got power back. Now I can make ice in my ice maker. No, you can't because it's contaminated. I'll use the filter and I have a reverse osmosis filter. Nope. That doesn't take care of those microbes that they're worried about. Yeah. I'm gonna brush my teeth. Nope, don't use the water from the faucet. And you do it. You've been doing it your entire life.
That's right.
And it's so hard not to do it. So it is very challenging. And if you've seen the pictures online of the post Helene, post Milton areas, I can tell you definitively that every single person that's come to my house to help me, and there have been a lot, who do not live in the area and have driven through, they come in and the first thing out of their mouths are, I had no idea.
Okay.
It is these debris piles line both sides of the street. 90% of the houses in my neighborhood were affected. They are as high as you are as you're driving or walking, some of them, and they are nonstop. It's every house. It just looks like a war zone.
Right.
So yes, when I bought my house, I did my due diligence like everybody else should have done, and most people did. When I bought my house, it had never flooded.
It had never flooded previously. Yeah.
Yes, and now all of those houses who had never flooded now have a flood claim, because we did our due diligence. We did what we were supposed to do. We said, hey, I'm going to buy a house that I know is safe, historically safe.
Right.
And, people buy houses in all sorts of areas, and then a sinkhole opens up on it, or they get hit by a microburst or a tornado. And, if somebody were to come to you after that and say, well, you should have known, you shouldn't have bought your house there. Like,
right.
What are you talking about? I mean,
where I am in Vancouver, British Columbia, historically one of the most stable climates, but at some point we're due for a gigantic earthquake.
Exactly.
We're right on that fault. It's going to happen sometime in the next 3,000 years, which for our lifetime.
But could be tomorrow.
But it could be tomorrow. We don't know. So, I mean, like, somebody saying, well, you shouldn't buy a house in Vancouver because there's going to be a predicted earthquake at some point. I mean, that's a pretty ridiculous thing to say.
So I wanted to come on the podcast. Adam from Anker immediately reached out to me. He had just sent me 2 sets of headphones. So many of my headphones were ruined, including the Audi's ones that we tried to salvage them, but they got submerged, and they were on a table. They were on a table. They should have been 30 inches high, and they were not. And there was 2 headphones stacked on top of them, or there was one underneath and one on top or something like that. And they're all ruined, so.
How about your Oppos that you've been using for years and years and years?
Those are gone.
No.
The little ones I've used on the podcast, all of those were in a plastic container that I never thought to raise. The TV's gone. All my front speakers are gone. There was water inside the receiver, which was on the third shelf of the third shelf of my equipment rack. My amps, my subwoofers, the couch, of course. I mean, it's all my DVDs were low. Were lower than that. Even some of the stuff that was high, like books and stuff like that, they were on bookshelves, and those bookshelves are made out of particle board, and they collapsed. Sure. After getting wet, and so that all got contaminated. You can't decontaminate books. Nope. I threw all the DVDs out too, because I'm like, what am I going to do with these things? I'm going to wash them by hand and all this. I would tell you what, all those codes that I've gotten that I was like, I don't know, why would I bother? I already own this on the disc, and I went ahead and tested it anyways. I'm certainly glad that I did, because now I have access to some movies. But yeah, it's been, I mean, we didn't even, we had a 2-shelf filing cabinet, and our bottom shelf just has crap in it, like old stuff that we don't really care about, and that we keep around just kind of because the top shelf had the important stuff. And I'm like, there's no way the water's going to get to this top shelf. I actually thought about it after we left. I couldn't get back in at that point, but I thought about it. I thought, oh man, well, it'll probably be fine. The water won't get past 12 inches in the house. I mean, so we're drying out our passports, and we're drying out our social security cards, and we're drying out. I went to to get a parking pass for the neighborhood I'm living in, and they're like, "Oh, I need your registration for your car." I'm like,
right,
yeah. I don't have that.
I mean, I did see a tip online after the fact, after Helene, prior to Milton, because, of course, many places did experience flooding for Milton, because they were in the path where it was blowing the water rather than it being directly the wind. But, one of the tips I saw was, just for papers and stuff like that you want to keep, lock them inside your dishwasher before you leave, because as long as the dishwasher survives, it's watertight. So it's like one place you could put stuff.
You think, okay, well, a flood, the water comes up and the water goes down. That's not how it works. Right. It's like the sea came into your house. There's refrigerators on their face. There's things that are just torn open. It is violent, and is. It was shocking to me, and to be part of it, really. And so we're surviving as a family. We're good. We're doing.
Well, I mean, we've been saying it over and over. I mean, the people cannot be replaced. So the people surviving is absolutely the number one priority. But so I'd
there
be
were-
thankful for that much, of
Yeah.
course. But
I had neighbors who hid in the rafters of their garage
Holy
to get away
smokes.
from the water.
wow,
I had elderly neighbors. I mean, this is, who basically were with them and their dog floating on their mattress
Right.
in the water during the storms. They didn't leave, and they didn't leave because they've got decades of experience of meteorologists telling them to leave, and it not being a
and
problem.
then it being survivable. Yeah.
My parents, I don't know what station they were watching, but they kept telling me, "Oh no, it's not going to be as bad as Adelia. We didn't get any water in Adelia." I'm like, "I don't know what you're watching, but you got to leave."
Yeah.
The day of the storm, I called them and said, my wife called them and I called them, and I called them and said, "Listen, you have to be ready to sleep on your countertops tonight because that's how bad it might be." I didn't know I was being as honest as I was being, because it ended up being, I was thinking it'd be a foot of water maybe in their house, because their house is even higher than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, oh, well, I want them to get out, because I have an autistic brother who can't deal with this sort
And
of thing.
he lives with your parents.
With my parents. And my wife called him and said, "I need to know your address so I can call 911 when I haven't heard from you in a certain period of time to go get you guys." And they evacuated them. They evacuated, barely in time. And so it was, that noise you're hearing, if you can hear it, is the roofer checking the roof of this place. So, if you were watching the wrong TV station, and the ones that were more conservative with their estimations versus the ones that are more realistic, and even a more national station, and then as opposed to a local, the national stations were like they're looking at the entire area, and they're like, there's going to be six feet of storm surge. Well, that might have been true for like the entire area, especially if you look down at Sarasota and some of the lower areas.
And I'm sure it's some particular spots that was true.
Yeah, but for the local stations, they were like, it could be 11 feet. You got to get out. The Tampa mayor was like, "If you stay, you will die." I mean, that's literally what she said. That was a direct
quote. Yep.
So, I'm happy that I got them out, but I understand why they thought it would be okay to stay.
Right.
So it was, it's been hard. I did not get back on the bike, which you're like, oh, what does that matter? Well, I could not imagine going. He's up there with a hammer, I guess.
That sounds like some hammering. Yeah, that's what that sounded like.
That's what my son came in here to tell me about, by the way. So I guess I shouldn't give him a hard time. But I didn't get back on the bike until yesterday. It was the first day since Helene. And it's mostly because I was just like, listen, I don't want to be with my thoughts and myself on a bicycle. I'm just going to break down. I'm just going to be, it's been so overwhelming.
No kidding.
And exhausting. Like I'm a pretty physical guy. I rock climb, I cycle, I do all this stuff. I am not made to swing a hammer for 14 hours a day. Like my right hand, I couldn't make a fist for days because we were just breaking out drywall and carting things away. And the other day we were cleaning up the drywall off the floor, trying to bag it up because a lot of it was still wet, and we were trying to get it into some sort of more secure, less toxic. And then my throat started closing up. I'm just like, geez, I'm falling apart over here.
No kidding.
So, it's the little things too. Like Rob, like, oh, I need to shave my head.
Right. Yeah.
You're like, I'll grab my razor, my electric razor.
It would be helpful to have water in that.
That doesn't exist. I don't have an electric razor anymore. Oh, I'll just use my regular razor. Oh, I'm at my in-laws' place, and they got the water pressure of a light spring drizzle. So it's like your whole life is upended, and we can't stay in this house. Is really the problem.
Not forever, obviously. No.
They have kids that are going to go home for college. Thanksgiving, we got to find someplace else to stay, and everybody, like, there isn't an Airbnb or a rental, and then immediately, even during Helene, but especially directly afterwards, we were seeing people, I've got a 2-bedroom, 1-bath that you can rent for if you need to stay someplace. It's $3,200 a month.
Ah.
Jesus, that's
Mhm.
bro. I mean, this area is not cheap. I'm not going to say it is, but that is over double what the going rate should have been, and people were snapping them up because they felt
Right.
like they had no
Well,
choice.
yeah.
The price gouging was real.
Yeah.
And then we were after Milton. We've been out of gas for a while because they couldn't get gas into the 8 neighborhoods, and then everybody wants gas for their cars to get around, and then for their generators to keep power in their house. So we actually had the police at gas stations when they got gas. They would be there just to keep the peace, just to keep it. You know, they would like
Crowd
block
control.
off side entrances so that people couldn't cut in line, because this is Florida and someone's getting shot like 100%. So luckily my wife's smarter than me, and she made sure all of our cars were filled up before Helene.
That does seem like a good precaution for sure.
When Milton was on its way in, we filled up again, and I mean we've been fine, but it's just been. I want to thank the AVRant listeners, knowing that somebody out there is at least worried. And I mean, I've got family and stuff like that, and that are of course reaching out. But knowing that you guys are out there, at least thinking of us and concerned about us, is a comfort on some level. We are kind of getting to the point where we can start processing the trauma. At the beginning, you're so busy throwing away everything you own.
It is survival mode type of thinking. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, we were sitting there, and I threw out this box, and it's got my wife's dad's passport from when he immigrated to America.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, his birth certificate's in there, and these things are all ruined, and we've got to throw them out. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is going to be, you can't get them back. Our wedding pictures are all gone.
Right.
You know, and to me, I'm not as sentimental as some people.
No, but still.
But people, you know, I'm just like, oh, and I would find her just standing off to the side, watching people drag our house out onto the curb, just staring off into space. And I'm just like, this is, no one should have to, you know, no one should have to. When we moved from here to Australia, we went through and we purged a lot of stuff, and that felt very, very hard. But it was our choice. You know, it was something we decided to do. And we had the option of saying, we're going to spend a bunch of money and put all this crap in the storage that we're probably never going to look at again. But to have it done to you is very, very difficult. So we're going to make it. You know, the schools are opening again tomorrow, finally. Wow. And, you know, we're just trying to live our life one day at a time and make decisions. And it's getting to the point now where we can't go back. There's nothing we can do at the house to help.
Right.
We've already done everything we can. So it's just now time to make decisions about whether or not we're going to hire this person or that person, or whether or not we're going to fix it at all, or we're just going to, you know, let it be the way it is. Some of those,
insurance isn't going to let you just bulldoze the place and start fresh.
That's not how that goes, man. Even if the house were to burn to the ground, it's people are like, oh well, insurance is used to buy a new house with insurance. That's not how insurance works. You know, even like flood insurance, the maximum amount for the inside for the structure of your house is $250,000.
Oh, geez,
that's the maximum. And then, like, I think the dead maximum for contents is $100,000.
Oh,
that's if you got the maximum insurance you can. And I think we got $67,000 of contents insurance, and that's just not going to. Doesn't pay
and
for
then there's a
everything.
deductible too. Even.
Yes, there's deductibles on top of that. So we'll make do. We'll do what we can, and in the end, it'll be okay. It's just very hard. We're in a very hard time right now. So I will try to come back to the podcast sooner rather than later.
Well, I mean,
right now I'm on my son's. He built himself a gaming PC right
Yeah.
before the thing happened, and that's what I'm using right now. This crappy
You brought
camera
it
with
with.
the stupid ring light. You can see it on my
Yep,
glasses.
it's in your glasses.
It's so awful, and it's blinding. I hate it. But I am going to use. So a lot of people send donations to PayPal. Once I can get myself back to a place where I can start setting up for a podcast again, I will use that money to first for the podcast equipment.
Oh my goodness! Well,
I need a microphone. I need lights. I need all everything, preamp or something. I don't know. I think the microphone stand is gone. Everything's gone.
Nobody is saying that should be the priority, Tom. But I mean, look, I get
no, but
that.
I want to. I mean,
it's a little bit of therapy for you,
Yeah.
honestly, in a sense, in its own way. That's a bit of the purpose that it serves.
Yeah.
So yes, I get it on that front for sure.
So we will. I will be back, and again, thank you all for keeping us in your thoughts, and those of you who have donated, I appreciate it. We will do everything we can to make those donations, help as much as possible. We will stretch those dollars. I want to thank Anker, specifically Adam, for sending us some a lot of battery backup stuff, and I used it. My wife's using it. My wife's using that power station thing that I took a picture of, which is a solar thing. Yeah. And she's using that right now at the house because she has to be there with the contractors while they start their work today. It's the first day they're starting their work. And this is not rebuilding.
No.
This is remediation still.
Yes.
They have to go through and figure out what's got mold and get rid of the mold. And so
might be easier to say what doesn't, but yeah.
Well, we did by all accounts, a quick and pretty good job of getting the walls open in time because does help us a lot. It can get real bad real fast.
It sure can.
So we are dang it, I keep hitting this stupid cable. I don't know if my son does this.
Yeah,
just up there
that's sort of telling you that.
That's pretty much what that is. I'll be honest with you. That's kind of the theme song of my life right now. That's my background music at all time. Construction.
That's not going to let up for a while.
I'm hoping 6 months. Yeah. I'm hoping we'll be back in the house in some capacity in 6 months. I think it's theoretically possible if I was my own contractor or coordinator, and I was super smart and in connected and everything else, we could be back in 3. I know people who are actual contractors who had things like this, who have their own crew that they called out the next day.
All right.
They got in like 2 weeks. But that's just...
That is not realistic.
That's not realistic. I got 2 kids, 3 kids technically. Yeah. Other one's up at college. I don't know what we're going to do with him when he wants to come home for Thanksgiving.
Right.
But, it's a lot. I need to change this shirt from 2020. Would not recommend to 2024. Would not recommend either. So pick a year. So,
you could just put a greater than 2000 sign, and I think it might
feels
cover
that
things.
Way.
Yeah,
it feels that way. But yeah, I want to thank, like I said, I want to thank the listeners, and I want to thank you, Rob, for keeping the fewer things I have to worry about, the better off I am right now. And every little bit helps. I've got friends that are taking care of my dogs, that they're living, that my dogs are living other places, because as hard as it is to find some place to stay, it's even harder when you have a dog, especially my little dog, who's kind of she's not very nice to other dogs. That way, she's not a very nice dog.
Okay, all right.
So she's nice to people, but she doesn't like other animals, so it becomes kind of a thing. So I do appreciate you guys. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rob, and thank you to all the listeners.
Oh gosh, well, no, I mean, words are completely inadequate. I mean, I feel silly saying I'm so sorry for everything that's gone on, because I mean, what is that? But I mean, we are thinking of you, and the support is there in at least little capacities in that, and we do keep in mind. I mean, there are people who have lost more, and the people who have lost people. And
yes,
as
I will say,
yeah.
if you're like, oh, I wish I could do something, but I can't, or whatever. First of all, I totally understand. I don't expect anybody to do anything. The only thing I want, like the entire listener community of AVRant to do, for me and for people like me, is to remember to be a little more kind and understanding when you hear of somebody going through something, and not immediately jumping to, and I'm not saying that anybody does, but immediately jumping to blame or to just be a little bit more compassionate.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I really want.
The
if you can do that, then that would be enough.
The kindness costs nothing. We can all spare that.
Yes.
That is a very nice message, Tom. Thank you for checking in with us. Because people have been worried, and legitimately so. So being able to see your face, hear your voice, that is really, really nice for everybody.
Not knowing whether or not you're going to come home to having a home, and really not the first time, the second time going, well, it's just a tree. What else can happen to the house? Is stressful. So thank you for being concerned, and I'm okay, and we're going to be okay eventually. We just get through the next couple of weeks of hurricane season, and then we can start trucking along. I think there'll be a little. We'll be better. We'll get there. Well,
thank you, Tom. I mean, again, words seem silly to say take care and stay safe, but it is true. We are hoping you do, and hopefully that is it for hurricane season. That would be best of all. Yeah, fingers crossed, jinx and all that.
Knocking on. I'll let that guy knock on wood up there.
He has been. He's
doing that just for me.
So Lee and I are gonna carry on now. I'll be switching sides in this video edit. That shouldn't throw anybody off too much, because the names will be below there to let you know who we are if you're looking at the YouTube version. But thank you so much, everybody, for keeping Tom and his family in your thoughts. And if you are able to support financially in that, come to the website. The PayPal link is right there on the right hand side, and that has been helping out in its own little way there. So
it is. Thank you. See you soon.
All right, so Lee won't be able to reference whatever it was that you just heard, because
that's true.
Because Lee has not had the opportunity to listen to the conversation that Tom and I had. But I mean,
the way the editing works, I didn't hear what you guys just heard, but I will hear it. I can guess a lot of what's in it.
It's not that difficult to predict. But I mean, as I said when I was talking to him, I'm just so glad to see him and hear him, and to know that everybody is okay physically. But as you can tell from having heard the way that he was speaking, I mean, he's in a bit of shock. I don't know if he is fully aware, but it was evident to me speaking to him that there's a bit of shock going on there, which is completely understandable right now. Everything that they've been through, I wasn't really aware, the full extent of, just how much property has been lost, how much physical labor has been involved. I've had the little notes about it, but it doesn't convey the true sense and scale and feeling of going through what Tom and his whole family are going through right now. Not to mention all the other people in his neighborhood and the surrounding areas who have it equally as bad or worse in some cases. So it's really, really tough.
I can only imagine when we had a bad tornado here in 2011, I was stressed out just because areas of my neighborhood looked very different.
Right.
I can only imagine, extrapolating that out 100 times, and then it's your own house. Everything's up in the air.
Yeah.
You're not 100% sure how this is all going to go. Look, I'm just crossing my fingers for smooth insurance processing.
Yeah,
that's just. I'm
hoping. I can't even hazard a guess as to how long this whole process is honestly going to take to get them back to something resembling being whole again.
Right.
So, Yeah, I don't know. I mean, words are completely inadequate. I think I don't know if I said that while we were recording or afterward, because Tom and I, of course, chatted a little bit after we stopped recording as well. And that's a little bit why I don't want to say too much on my end, because I'm having trouble remembering what was said on the recording versus after the recording. And some of those things weren't really meant to be made public. So I'm gonna leave it at what we recorded there. And you can hear Tom speaking in his own words about that. And before we go a second further, I don't want to forget whatsoever. Tom said it himself, but we really want to extend our thanks to Anker, which I don't know if they pronounce it Anker or Anker, because I've heard both.
I think it's Anker.
But I've always said Anker because that's the way it appears. But yeah, I mean, they graciously supplied Tom with, he mentioned it's a Solex portable power station. It can act as a emergency lamp, and it provides battery-powered household outlets, so it's good for powering, anything that plugs in with a regular 15-amp plug there. They also sent him a few gallium nitride prime power banks that charges USB devices, USB hub, power adapters, charging cables, all the sorts of things that you absolutely need, but don't necessarily have on hand when you're getting out of there and worrying more about life and limbs. So he can basically charge anything that needs charging, power things temporarily, and also, I mean, they were really, really generous. Basically, anything that Tom requested, they sent along. Just trying to help out in the way that they could. So, massive thank you to Anker now and forever going on forward. That's coming from Tom. It's coming from me too on his behalf. They're not like a official sponsor of this podcast, but for folks reaching out and really helping in a time of need like that, can't thank them enough. So that's from Tom, from his family, from everyone here at AVRant. Thank you to Anker. That's tremendous of them to have done that.
That is fantastic. I've been thinking about getting something like that myself, but that's going to help him so much during the times he has to spend at that house.
That's right. Well, I mean, like you mentioned, his wife took that Solex power bank because back to their house while the first workers were showing up, because there's no power there. Like you can't even put on a work light and get a view of the situation. So it's remarkable how much we need life's amenities to make do. Otherwise, you're like, oh, wait a second. Yeah. When you don't have water,
we've designed our whole society around having electricity and cars.
How quickly it can go. How quickly we can be without those things. So, I guess to try and wrangle this back to being a little bit lighthearted, I will say happy Thanksgiving, because it was Canadian Thanksgiving this past weekend. Yes. It's already taken place. I'm already belated in wishing happy Thanksgiving, but that's always fun for all the American listeners who are like, what are you talking about? There's a month to go yet. No, there isn't. We've already finished the harvest. It's already been Thanksgiving.
That's right. They're farther north. The leaves are turning.
Oh, yes.
I have to mow the lawn.
The leaves are definitely turning. It's really quite beautiful. And we might as well. I'm putting it all together in my head here, but we're probably like 40 minutes into this podcast at this point now with the way the editing would have gone. So I will finally at this moment say, this is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And to get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask by sending your questions to our email address, which is question@avrant.com. Pretty easy to figure out once you know it's question, and then our website, avrant.com. And speaking of, you can come to our website. You can see all of our show notes there. There's timestamps in there to let you know if you want to skip around in the episodes. We've got the links to anything that we talk about or recommend. We've got a link to our Flickr album for each episode where you can see any images that we're referencing. And then if you want to see those images in real time as we're talking about them, come on over to youtube.com/avrant. That's our YouTube channel page, and you can see our talking heads going back and forth. And if I'm bringing up images that we're referencing, then that's when you can see them in real time. Let's see other ways to contact us. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast. Probably not going to find too much response there because Tom was usually the one looking at that. Guess what? He's not so much looking at the AVRant podcast Facebook page at the moment, and I don't spend very much time there whatsoever. But that is a way that you can find us and reach out to us. And then, all of us are around individually. I'm Rob at avrant.com. Tom is Tom at avrant.com. And Lee is Lee at avrant.com. So it works for any of us. Yeah.
That is the easiest way to contact regarding anything
That's right.
AV.
Yeah. Yeah. If you just want to reach any of us individually. And then, what social media handles I'm at, First Reflect. If I'm on a social media, that'll be my handle. So you can search and see if I'm there, because if that handle isn't there, I'm not there. Easy as pie. And then Lee, even though I haven't updated that lower third, so it still says at Lee Overtweet, which was the wonderful pun when it was Twitter and it all made sense.
It was so good
It was
It's still Twitter. Screw that guy. It's Twitter.
There's still enough references in like a decade's worth of movies that we're like never going to forget that there was this thing called Twitter at one point.
I'm such a grumpy old man when it comes to changing good names to something else. Like there's this phenomenon in this town I live in where they keep changing logically numbered and named streets to the names of rich white guys.
Okay.
And so I don't care. I keep calling it the number it was.
Yup.
There's a road here that goes by the river. It was called River Road.
Yes, it was.
Then they changed it to the name of a person. It's still River Road.
Alrighty.
And it's Twitter, and I don't care. But yeah, if you want to reach me, Lee at AVRant.com. That's a good way to do it. Although I did notice somebody's email to me went to the spam folder.
Oh, yeah.
And somehow
from the forwarding process. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, they notice it's forwarded. And so I'm a little worried about that. So I don't know how to tell
you'll
them.
just have to check your spam once in a while. Make sure you
have to check the spam.
I know. Yeah,
that's right.
Or, do you want to give out your other Twitter handle where people can normally find you? You're a little more active?
I guess it feels a little eye-rolling because that's my special interest Twitter handle, the Tesla Lusa.
There it is.
So I live in Tuscaloosa and I have a Tesla, so at Tesla Lusa.
Keeping the puns going no matter what.
I'm trying, but everything keeps changing the name, and then things get disappointing. I don't know.
So this might end up being an extra lengthy episode. We're not quite sure exactly how things are going to go, but
let's just see.
We're gonna play it by ear a little bit and get into our regular segment that we start things off. It feels like we're a lot farther along, but no, start things off. Yeah. What we watched in this past week, and it actually is within this past week for Lee this time. I'm looking at this rather sparse, empty field here in the document, so I don't know what Lee is going to speak about, if anything. But Lee, what did you watch this past week?
Jack Squat.
Oh, okay. So the document's not lying to me.
It's been a busy and stressful week. Again, I talked about my mom in rehab. That's been a big distraction. Other things have been going on. So listen, I've been falling asleep to YouTube videos on the couch.
Okay.
So that's what I've been doing. And I can't, I know I watched something. I can't even think of it right now.
It made that
I'll
much
try
of an
really
impression.
hard in the coming week to watch something on purpose other than a football game.
Yeah.
And we'll see how it goes. Now, I'm always going to watch an Alabama football game, but there's nothing to talk about there anymore, video-wise. Nothing to discuss about the great audio or anything. So, nothing home theater-ish.
Well,
for
that's
me this
all right.
week,
I mean, we got the little bit of update that people might have definitely been wondering about as far as your mom's health. So glad to hear that that's still progressing in a positive manner overall.
They might be shuttling her on home a little sooner than I'm comfortable with, but that's how healthcare goes. And maybe we'll get her some home healthcare visits and we'll see how that goes. But she is healing.
Good.
It's getting better for a change.
Glad to hear that on that front.
Yes.
Well, I will go ahead and talk about what I watched this week, which wasn't a ton. I kind of just finished up the one movie that I was watching this week just in time to record this podcast. So that's pretty fresh in my mind. But first, I will continue to say I am watching The Penguin every week. This was episode 4, and they took a little risk in this episode 4. It's not like the first time a series has ever done anything like this, but episode 4 of The Penguin had very, very little of the Penguin character in it. They decided to dedicate more or less. He is still in it. It's not, but he was by no means the central figure of this episode as he has been in the previous 3. So they decided to really focus on Kristen Miliotti's character, Sophia Falcone. Get a big whole bunch of puzzle pieces filled in on her backstory there, and she is such a fantastic actor that everybody on the show is so good. So I have no qualms watching an entire episode dedicated to her because she is fantastic in this. But it definitely like sheds new light on things, changes going forward, whatever expectations you might have had of this show and where things were going with her. They turn things around. They pull out a pretty big twist going on here. So yeah, it was kind of brave,
You still seem very positive about it.
I am very, very positive about this show. So I can
maybe I
only
need
hope
to
it keeps
actually
on going.
watch.
That could be your one. You could watch one episode a week. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just to keep up with what you're watching.
That's right. But in terms of a movie that I watched this week, I watched Longlegs, which is a pretty recent movie, psychological thriller. It is a FBI manhunt for a serial killer. That is, certainly a premise that we've seen of things before, but this has its own unique take on it, not the least of which is because we have Nicolas Cage in this movie doing almost what is like an exaggerated impression of Nicolas Cage.
I was about to ask if Nick Cage was once again playing Nick Cage.
Well, I mean, but it's a very twisted version of Nicolas Cage, and
that's Nick Cage.
True. But yeah, I mean, he's appropriately disturbing in this movie for sure. Now, much was made of the sort of makeup job that they applied to him and saying how grotesque and creepy the characters' faces, and they hide it for most of the movie. It is this sort of reveal of the character's appearance finally that comes along. Having heard all of that going into the movie, I was like, oh, it wasn't really that. There's a whole explanation of, well, I guess there isn't an explicit explanation of why he looks the way he does, but there's certainly enough context, I thought, in the movie that fully explains why his face looks the way that it does. I thought it was contextually completely explained to my satisfaction anyway, so I'm not sure why I saw such a big deal of that being made about it. I didn't think it was that particularly shocking or inexplicable or anything like that, but Micah Monroe is the main character in this. I really only know her from It Follows, which was a great little indie horror movie, really terrific. So she's sort of, in that sense, staying in a somewhat similar genre. This had a pretty low budget. This was not a big budget movie at all. What I liked a lot about this was, through a good portion of Longlegs, I was like, oh, this feels like some really classic good X-Files. It had a lot of that feeling to it. I mean, including the going into a dark space with the flashlight beams, like they did so often in X-Files. Very classic feel that way. I mean, it's FBI agents. It's a manhunt. I'm not spoiling it here. It's not aliens, so it's not X-Files in that sense, but it had that, I mean, all of the X-Files episodes weren't aliens either. That was the overarching plot, but they did individual episode investigations, as FBI agents might do. So it had a lot of that feeling to it. Not least of which, it was shot in Vancouver, BC, just like X-Files used to be. Vancouver standing in for Oregon in this case, but that's not climate-wise a million miles away whatsoever, so we can quite easily do a good job of that. So yeah, I liked the performances in this. I really liked a lot of the shot composition, the camera photography in this, because they did a great job of, they would have, the main character that we're watching in the scene, they're front and center, but they have the camera pulled back enough that there's like, you can't help, your eyes are just looking to the background, like what's gonna move in the shadow in the background, what little light is gonna blink on, what little wind thing is gonna, like, you can't help it. And the music is coming and the score is underneath, and they really did a good job of maintaining that sense of tension throughout the entire movie. And in many, many instances, nothing moves in the background, but
I don't need to watch a movie like that. That's how I just live.
Right.
Okay, so like how you felt watching that movie, FYI, that's me just going through daily life.
Okay, all right. I don't know if this would make it better or if it just wouldn't impact you at all in that case.
Right, it would just feel normal. Right. Like I'm always ready for a jump scare.
But they did a really good job of maintaining that tension with that shot composition. Did a really nice job of that. Now, one thing on a technical level that I wanted to point out is they do make use of changing aspect ratios in this movie. It begins that way, and I was wondering if it's only going to be at the very beginning, but they do go back to it. At the beginning, it's fun. It's like a 4:3 aspect ratio, but with rounded corners.
What?
And they did that to make it look like an old photograph. You know, like how you remember those old photos that had the rounded corners on them?
I could probably reach one in this room.
There you go.
I have so much media and old photographs and videos in this room. Wait a minute.
Yep. And so they kind of stuck with that because anytime they went to a flashback, there you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That was the shape.
If you're watching on YouTube, it's a picture of me with my grandparents.
All right.
And it has the rounded corners.
You got the rounded corners on a pretty square-shaped photograph overall.
With, And it has that texture. When you look really close, it looks like a series of little circular bumps.
Yep. And that
was very popular in the 1970s.
That is exactly what they're going for because the flashbacks are to 1974 and 75, I believe.
Perfect. Okay. All right. It's got a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. It wasn't just purely for a quirky choice. Now, it wasn't just that they switched between 2.35 and 4x3 with rounded corners. It was that when it went to the 4x3 with rounded corners aspect ratio, it was at that point taller than the 2.35 that the majority of the movie is in.
Okay.
But it wasn't that the 4x3 with rounded corners went top to bottom on your 16:9 screen. It still had tiny little black bars above and below the 4x3 points. So what it really was the regular aspect ratio of this movie was 1.85 to 1, which is a very standard aspect ratio for a lot of movies. Right. But then they, within that 1.85 to 1 frame, switched between 2.35 and 4x3 with rounded corners.
So you're always going to have at least a sliver of black all the way across the top and bottom.
There's always a little bit of black bar somewhere on the screen. And so, again, because I have never recommended people purchase a CinemaScope aspect ratio projection screen and therefore have to either have an anamorphic lens in place in front of their projector at all times or rely on zooming, but also at that point cropping the top and bottom of the image. I always feel like a bit of justification whenever a movie, because this is
not going to make sense on one of those.
You're going to be missing some of the image. If you choose to do that and have a constant image height type of setup on your screen, in some form or fashion, you're going to be missing some of the image of this movie. And that would be a shame because they absolutely framed things in the different aspect ratios to make use of the full aspect that was being used at that point. But I just found it so curious that like the 4x3 didn't feel your full 16:9 screen. You always had a little bit of black bar top and bottom there. And then at the very beginning of this movie, they make a gradual transition in the aspect ratio. And I was like, oh, if you had one of those really fancy Lumagen video processors with the motorized masking on your screen, it could actually like follow along in your motorized masking as it gradually changes. But then later in the movie, they do some very rapid cuts between 4x3 with rounded corners and 2.35 to 1. They rapidly cut back and forth. And there's no way your motorized masking could keep up with that if it was trying to change along with it. So, yeah, I just
it would make snapping breaking sounds if it tried.
On a technical level, I thought that was a little bit of interest there, and I kind of enjoyed that. So I give it a thumbs up. I echo a lot of the reviews that I saw that depending on how you feel about somewhat supernatural or occult type of explanations of things, which I'm like, I always prefer personally movies that either leave it open to interpretation or there is like a completely zero supernatural explanation. That's my personal preference because I don't believe in anything supernatural in the slightest little bit. I have zero belief in any of that, but this goes pretty definitively in the sense of there really was some supernatural aspect to it. So on a personal level, I maybe don't absolutely love that. But it ends kind of abruptly. It felt like maybe there was another 5 minutes almost that we needed on the end of this movie, and I will echo that little bit of criticism there. But that doesn't detract for me from the absolute majority, and it's only about an hour and 40 minutes, this movie, so it doesn't overstay its welcome or anything like that. And overall, I definitely give it a thumbs up. I think it's worth a watch. But yes, if you absolutely hate anything psychological anxiety like that, then it's probably not for you. It does a great job with tension.
I wonder how. I kind of want to watch it now, just to see what I think. I'm curious about the aspect ratios. I don't like supernatural stuff either. I ride high on anxiety all the time. What would it be like for me to watch it? I don't know. Now I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, there you go. It's right there in case you ever want to.
It's definitely not my kind of movie. But what would happen? I don't know.
Hey, it's good to expose yourselves to things that not usually what you watch.
Right.
So, without any further ado, now that we're probably an hour into this,
I think we've had a lot of ado.
Yes, I can't go any further without thanking our listeners of the week, and those are folks who have supported this podcast in some way. And right now, if you want to donate to Tom and his family and just send some money their way, you can use our PayPal link. If you come to avrant.com and over on the right-hand side where it says support AVRant, if you click on that, it'll take you to PayPal. You don't have to have a PayPal account. You can just input credit card information without signing up an account for PayPal itself if you don't want to be involved in that. But yeah, if you want to throw some money Tom's way, all of that money that's going to the PayPal donations, that's going straight to Tom. And he mentioned that in our conversation, his plans and how that really is helping him out and how thankful he is that people have been so generous and willing to do that. Good. We have more people to thank this week. Those names are Richard, Karl, Jason, and Niels. Like I said last week, there's every possibility we've missed somebody along the way because, yes, there are many, many distractions and pressing matters that Tom is having to look after. So by no means are we intentionally leaving anybody out. If we did, you can let me know. Drop me a line, question@avrant.com or rob@avrant.com. If I've left out your name, just let me know. I want to thank you publicly on this podcast if you haven't heard your name mentioned between last week and this week. But yes, people can also support us financially in other ways, including patreon.com/AVRant podcast. You can go there to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation if you'd like to. So we have 133 patrons holding steady who are giving us money every month that way automatically. So a big, big thank you to all of our patrons over there at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Now, if you don't want to just hand money over to us, if you support our podcast in any way, just let us know about it, and we will thank you right here in this section. So Jefferson let Value Electronics know that we sent him their way to get some 3D glasses for his new JVC projector, because he was like, yeah, where do I get the JVC glasses? The dealer that he bought the projector from, they're like, yeah, a lot of people don't like the JVC branded glasses, and they're like $130 each. So we had the suggestion on where he can get the compatible glasses that cost less and people like more, and Value Electronics sells them. So thank you, Jefferson, for talking us up to that retailer. And Vince says that he will be sending Tom an Amazon gift card next month at American Thanksgiving. But since it was just Canadian Thanksgiving this past weekend, he decided to send me an Amazon gift card this past week as well. So that is very, very nice of you, Vince. Thank you so much for doing that. And Tom will thank you in the future when you send him the Amazon gift card for American Thanksgiving.
Absolutely.
Now, Tom is still editor-in-chief over at avgadgets.com, but understandably, I haven't seen an update from Tom on that website for a little bit because he hasn't had power and internet access for a while after the 2 hurricanes that went through his neighborhood. So people do still sometimes send in photos, though, and Tom likes to use real AVRant listener and AV Gadgets readers' photos whenever that opportunity exists. So Stefan kindly remembered that if he gives permission in perpetuity, that Tom can go ahead and use those photos that he sent in on AV Gadgets one day. So he just might do that. So thank you, Stefan, for giving that permission to Tom. And finally, just want to thank people who sent in notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Because yes, as you can tell, things are not exactly our normal status quo around here, but we are keeping the podcast going in one way or another. So the names this week and their comments for that came along with some of them. Tony says he discovered our podcast about a year ago, and he can only imagine how much more money he would have saved if he had been listening to us since day one of his theater build, which for him started during the pandemic. And you're not alone there, Tony. I know that happened for a lot of people, but he didn't find us right away, not until a little ways into his home theater journey. So he says he's listening now, and he appreciates us being a voice of reason in the home theater world. I like to think of us that way too, Tony.
You know, that's like one of my favorite things about this podcast. It's how I found this podcast a million years ago. In the late aughts, right?
Yep.
I think so.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. And I like being a part of something where you listen to most audiophile stuff, quote unquote. You get some wild stuff.
And you get the influencer side of things now too, which is growing and growing. Some of the, the hype, the FOMO, that's how they get you to keep clicking back every week. It's like, got to make you afraid of missing out.
I like the idea that we might be influencing without being influencers.
Yeah, I certainly don't consider myself part of the influencer crowd, although yes, might have influenced somebody in some way, but hopefully in a way that saves money and saves time and saves hassle, because that's our aim around here. All I ever want to do is give the advice that I would want to receive if I were the one asking the question. That is my North Star in all of this.
That's exactly it, yes.
Tony, thank you very much for that note. Jay Karl wrote in with a note of gratitude. Donald, Karl, Jonathan, who also had a note saying he simply has been enjoying his CDEN home theater. I think he's up to like version 4.5 at this point. So he hasn't been making any big changes this year. So he hasn't written to us in a while, but he's still listening every week, he says. And his theater, unfortunately, back in 2021, had hurricane damage to his own home theater, so he can truly sympathize with what Tom is going through. So that was a different part of the country there, but 2021 he went through something similar, so he's like, I get it, and we fully understand. Stefan wrote in with note of gratitude and also said that he enjoyed that we got a kick out of calling his original 32-inch television that he had in his first version of his home theater. He was like, what was that, a keyhole? Because we said that his 50-inch plasma was like a porthole compared to the new G4 OLED that he got himself. So we've gone in that progression. He got a kick out of us enjoying it.
Just the idea that back when 32-inch tube TVs were a new thing, you had one, you had the big TV.
You sure did.
You had the good big TV. You'd invite people over. We did. We had a 32 and we would watch DVDs. I'm like, listen to the stereo sound.
That's right. I remember the first big screen TV I got was a 43-inch rear projection CRT.
Oh, man. It's like staring into a flashlight.
That's right. And it was still 4:3 aspect ratio, but it had the mode where it could do... it was technically, I think it was 1080i because it couldn't do progressive scan. I recall that. So it was like 1080i, but of course with the permanent black bars above and below. And I remember anytime I actually watched HD TV content on that, it would stay on for about 40 minutes before it turned itself off from overheating. So it was like maybe not quite genuinely ready for HD TV was that television.
Low temperature, high def TV. I've not heard of one of those until now.
And it weighed over 300 pounds, as I recall.
Yes.
Yeah, it was not easy to move around. For
oh, man. I still have video of me helping a close friend move a 400-pound television into her mobile home at the time. Yep. So that was like a 55-inch, 60-inch, something like that. Somewhere around 60-inch. It was spendy. Yeah. And I actually have 16:9 video. Yep. And this was the year 2000. Yep. So I actually have widescreen video of moving a widescreen TV into a house.
But mine was one of those old triple CRT cannons inside. Hitachi at the time, because they were the ones that had the actual like vibrant looking green color. Not the least bit accurate. I didn't know about stuff like that back then. But it sure made the greens look green.
Just intense. Every lawn was beautiful. Yes. This is like old guy nerd stuff.
Oh yeah,
right? I remember when TVs
though.
were 300 pounds.
I know there are people who enjoy reminiscing about those days. So we went off. We went off on a tangent there. I didn't even finish the names of the notes of gratitude. So
that's right.
After Stefan, we had Joe, Manuel, Vince, Gurinder, Mark, and Tim. Tim, who kindly said AVRant is his favorite podcast of all the podcasts he listens to. So that's so nice. So yes, thank you all so much. Those notes of gratitude and encouragement are definitely appreciated these days. So yeah, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in their questions. And with that, I think we're perhaps ready for some news here.
News. Let's actually do some content. With their October issues now delivered, both Sound and Vision and Home Cinema Choice have ended their runs as print magazines. Yeah. I only recently heard that they still existed. I used to get Sound and Vision, and then other things like, the internet came along. Yep. Both outlets will continue as digital-only services available via their respective websites, but it's the end of their print media forms after nearly 25 years in the case of Sound and Vision, and after 365 print issues in the case of Home Cinema Choice. This basically leaves Stereophile Magazine as the only outlet left standing with a physical physical print version still available. Both Infinite Gary and Karl wrote in to express how they'll miss receiving the printed versions in their mailboxes, but it isn't exactly a surprise, and they'll just have to continue with their digital-only subscription from now on, just like everybody else.
Yep.
And I kind, again, grumpy old man, I kind of miss my magazines, but the information, it got to the point I already knew everything in the magazine when it arrived.
Yeah.
Because of forums I was in or YouTube videos I was watching in more recent years. It just, what was the point?
And for me, certainly the style of writing, I just got to it. Because, the style of writing in magazines the idea was, this is a magazine, you might be reading it on a plane, in a waiting room. It's that type of thing. It had that more narrative style. You begin any review with a whole history, and you get to know the reviewer a little bit and every review that they write, and it's not until the very end that you might get a measurement or two thrown in there.
That's right.
Because it was all subjective take and everything like that, and as things went on, I was like, please just tell me the objective data straight up front, and that's more and more the online sites have gone that direction, but I'm like, I just want it fast. I want it immediate. I don't want to read any flowery language, and it completely changed the way that I consume media like that and reviews. Back
in the 90s and 2000s, every sort of audiophile article would start with Jim ran his fingers through his swept-back blonde hair as the air conditioner hummed in his office, and I don't care. Is it a good projector?
Oh, you will find out somewhere towards the end. Not at the very end. They don't want you skipping right to the end.
No.
You got to make your way through the entire journey to get the full subjective feel for what was going on. So yeah, I mean, that was a style. It still continues. There are still some articles written in that fashion. But yeah, the death of print media like this, I bemoan it too. I'm sad about it too, but I am also not shocked, noticing that financially it just didn't make sense for them to continue doing that anymore. But it's not as though the outlets themselves and all the writers there and everything, it's not like they're all gone. They're not closing up shop. It's digital only now. You head to their websites, you still subscribe to them in that fashion, and you get the information more quickly than waiting for the print version. But yeah, we don't have that tangible archive of it anymore. So
I will admit that reading from printed material is easier to read physically. Yeah. It just is. But then the thing in your hand is now in the way.
That's right.
and the trees are screaming. And I'm trying to recycle things, and it just it's getting things are better now, but it feels weird. I miss that natural effect.
End of an era. We were marking it here.
Karl pointed us to an article written by John Atkinson for Stereophile magazine about the new Amplifier Rule from the FTC that recently took effect. Back in 2020, the FTC at the time proposed eliminating the Amplifier Rule that was first put in place in 1974. It provided parameters for an FTC rating of any audio amplifiers in an effort to protect consumers from the often wildly different claims about output wattage and amplifier power that different manufacturers were using prior to that time. Over the years, the FTC Amplifier Rule was amended and updated, but the 2020 version of the FTC thought it was time to eliminate it altogether to, quote, free businesses from unnecessarily prescriptive requirements benefiting consumers. So they just literally said, we hate to burden businesses with the idea of actually informing and benefiting their consumers. So this was the classic
2020.
20 to 20 at point whatever total harmonic distortion ratings.
Right. 8 ohms, 0.1% total harmonic distortion in most cases, but yes, the full thing. I mean, some of the updates that happened was like when we started going from, stereo or monoblock amplifiers to multi-channel amplifiers. That's when the whole, saying whether it was all channels driven or 2 channels driven, that type of update came in place, but they weren't at that point talking about eliminating the amplifier rule. They were just talking about amending it to keep pace with what was going on in the market. But yes, 2020, you might recall what sort of FTC was in office at that time. And
I do.
They were trying to eliminate that amplifier consumer protection rule altogether.
Right. Sometimes politics matters. I just want to read it again. Free businesses from the unnecessarily prescriptive requirements benefiting consumers.
Yeah. That's a direct quote from the FTC at the time. Yeah.
We'd hate to make a business benefit a consumer.
By simply giving you parameters by which to specify this electronic device? Is that really so cumbersome to the business?
Gosh, we hate making businesses make things easy to compare. Why would we do that? There was quite a response when the 2020 FTC opened up their proposal for comments, however, and now in 2024, as of August, not only has the amplifier rule remained in place, but they have actually made it even tougher to exaggerate any claims about output power. The new rules only apply to any claims of a maximum output power spec. Manufacturers are not required to publish any such specification, but if they choose to do so, the parameters are now more stringent than they were before. So you're going to see, I guarantee you're going to see the so-called higher-end audiophile places not print these strict
and
specs.
you will see the little loophole that exists.
Yeah. And then, but you will see the more common brand names you're used to, who are confident of the products they're making.
That's right.
Publish these specs. Yeah. So I'm going to look for said specs next time I'm looking for a product like this. And if they don't want to list it, I'm suspicious. So if you've ever looked at the specs for some audio amplifiers, you might have seen a maximum output power spec claiming a certain number of watts delivered into one channel at 6 ohms at 1 kilohertz only with 1% total harmonic distortion, or THD plus N.
Yeah, for noise. Yeah. So that was the old parameters. That was part of it. That was perfectly fine for people listening to it that way under the FTC specifications, because that's what it used to be.
Well, now, if you want to publish a maximum output power as part of the new FTC standard, as of August 2024, it has to be with both channels driven in a stereo amplifier at 8 ohms at all frequencies from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz with 1% THD plus N. There are also new requirements for driving the amplifier at full rated power for a period of time and then operating at a lower power level immediately after without ever exceeding 1% THD plus N at any time.
Yeah.
If any manufacturers want to continue using the old parameters or they want to use parameters of their own, they're free to do so, but they have to note that this rating does not meet the 2024 FTC standard. So keep an eye out for that moving forward.
Yeah.
That's good, actually.
That's fine. It. It's clear.
Yeah. They have to say what we're doing does not meet the standard.
Right. Now, I mean, you can absolutely debate whether the new, more stringent standard is necessary for a maximum output power spec. I could quibble with some of that, honestly.
Sure.
I don't really know why, in the case of a 2-channel stereo amplifier, it needs to be both channels driven. If I'm talking about what is the maximum output power, it is possible I'm using just one of those channels at a given moment. So if this isn't the sustained power, the regular FTC spec that we were familiar with before, which as far as I'm aware hasn't changed in any significant way, but this maximum output power spec, I'm like, no, I was kind of fine with the 1-channel driven. That actually made sense to me in a way. I do kind of like that it's the full frequency range as opposed to just 1 kilohertz. That to me makes sense. Whether it's 6 ohms or 8 ohms is kind of immaterial. I mean, it's going to change the number, but you can sort of choose. They could have chosen 4 ohm. That would have been a perfectly acceptable thing to do on there. The 1% total harmonic distortion, that's just sort of widely accepted at this point for when it comes to mid-range and treble frequencies where it's audibly noticeable that it's starting to distort at that point. Really can't tell in low bass frequencies. So I mean, there you could quibble. Did it need to go down to 20 hertz in this spec if we're talking maximum output power, but you're not allowing more than 1% total harmonic distortion? That's going to necessarily clamp the figure that they can claim. And,
sure.
Maybe that's not really fair, and I think you could absolutely debate something like that. But
it
nevertheless,
is a reasonable standard that then allows you to compare.
That's what it's really about. It's just saying that if you're going to adhere to current now 2024 as of August FTC standards in specifying your audio amplifier, if you're going to adhere to those, and we're going to be able to compare across brands, then nobody's going to be able to make some wild claim that they're outputting a kilowatt when they really can't. Under those parameters.
Moving on to another topic, ADTH has announced their new NextGen TV USB dongle. They don't have a price listed for it yet, but it should be less expensive than their $90 NextGen TV box. You plug an over-the-air antenna into one end, and the USB connection on the other end goes into an Android TV, Google TV, or Fire TV streaming box of your choice. You load the ADTH app And now your streaming box has a single ATSC 3.0/ATSC 1.0 tuner that is fully compliant with encryption and DRM as long as you have an internet connection to the streaming box. Now, I will get started on the topic of ATSC 3.0 and the DRM and the encryption. I say don't buy any until they get rid of this DRM. This is my opinion. It's public airwaves. The whole point of broadcast television is that it is free to air. And so I'm not going to buy any ATSC 3.0 stuff. I'm just not if it has DRM. So I'm kind of the opposite. If it actually decodes any encryption, I don't want it to make a point.
Okay. Yeah, that's
because it's free airwaves.
That's fair.
There's only one set of airwaves.
Yeah. I do like that ADTH because there's not a ton of companies that are really doing much in this space of add-on NextGen TV tuners. So I like that there is a company doing it, not at exorbitant prices, and just saying, hey, look, we know people already have their streaming boxes. In all likelihood, if you have a streaming box, you've connected it to the internet because it doesn't do a whole lot unless you've connected your streaming box to the internet. So that's kind of a given. And they're like, hey, if you just want to watch some over-the-air television, you've got an antenna or you purchase one, which doesn't have to be terribly expensive, then why not let you use the same box that already has its HDMI port and it's already connected to your TV? So I like that they're, providing that option. Don't know how much it's going to cost, but I'm not anticipating in any sense that ADTH is going to overprice this thing. So I'm guessing it'll be like $50, something like that.
But the whole encryption thing, I just can't get past it.
I don't love it either.
That's not what this particular show is about. Maybe we should really delve into that at some point in the future because some people still enjoy antennas.
It's not ADTH who decided any of that, though. No. They're just here's the specification. We're going to give you a way to watch it. That's completely legal and all above board.
No, hey, more power to them to sell a full-featured product. Yeah. Because there are 3.0 tuners that can't do the encryption properly. And so you might miss a broadcast or two depending on the choices of your broadcasters. But I'm never going to watch an encrypted thing on broadcast. Never going to happen. We have the internet if you want to stream things and pay for it.
Yes,
Moving along to some comments. Karl, Nathan, and Joe Klusnick, the people have heard John's lip sync woes and they really want to help.
Yes.
Karl has a very similar signal chain, the same JVC NZ9 projector, same Mad VR NV video processor, but a Trinoff Pre-Pro in Karl's case rather than the JBL Synthesis Pre-Pro that John has. Nevertheless, Karl says he experienced very similar lip sync problems with his Apple TV 4K at first, and he called his dealer and the folks at Trinoff to try and get it sorted out. In his case, the solution was to adjust his universal remote macro that powers on the system. The JVC NZ9 projector needed to be power on all by itself at first and allowed to fully boot up, which thanks to being a laser projector is only about 10 seconds. After that delay, the Mad VR NV video processor can be powered on, followed by the Trinoff Pre-Pro, and finally, the Apple TV 4K at the end. Ever since that power on macro and the timing has been adjusted, Karl's system hasn't had a lip sync problem anymore.
Yeah.
So it was all about which one came on first.
And that's allowing it to fully boot up, which again actually lends evidence to my original suspicion that it is about the Apple TV 4K at either the head of the chain or the end of the chain, however you want to think about it. But at one end of the chain, having to look through three devices with three separate EDIDs, not quite being able to figure out which one to clock itself to and synchronize with. So yeah, in Karl's case, he's like, look, just make sure that the projector is on and fully booted up first, because it takes a bit in projectors. They're not completely ready to go instantly as soon as you hit the power button.
So if it's projector first, does that mean when he gets done turning everything on, the Apple TV is syncing with the projector
now
going through
the other devices? It should be synchronized with the projector at that point, yes, because each device in the chain working its way up is clocking itself to the device before it. So JVC is on first, then the Mad VR gets to clock itself to the JVC. The Trinoff in his case, or the JBL Synthesis in John's case, will clock itself to the Mad VR, and finally the Apple TV clocks itself to the Pre-Pro. So it works its way along. So I'm crossing my fingers because heaven knows that's that's not costing John any money if that's the fix. He just might have to adjust if he's using a universal remote or a Crestron control system or something like that. That's a little bit of programming to get that all fixed. Or if he's just picking up one remote at a time, it's just adding that bit of patience of turning on the JVC first, let it warm up, let it fully boot up, get through its full, screen and everything, and be waiting at the appropriate input, and then begin turning on devices one by one after that.
Yeah, it's like me waiting on my dinky little Roku in the den and waiting and then finally I get to select, and then I wait, and then I wait, and then I select who I am, and then I wait, and then I wait. Nathan suggested making sure the match frame rate setting in the Apple TV 4K is turned off. We had mentioned to John that if nothing else works, perhaps adding an HD Fury device might help. Well, Nathan had done just that in his system, but it wasn't until he turned match frame rate off that he was able to get a decent lip sync, even with the HD Fury in place.
So, a little bit strangely there is like, every time the frame rate is switching, it's doing a new HDMI handshake. So further evidence that it's just like, the Apple is losing track of what it's supposed to be synchronized with. So it's possible that in both Karl's case and John's case that might be part of it too. So at least a few more things for John to check out that don't cost any money. I like that.
I'm just picturing the meme where all the different Spider-Mans are pointing at each other.
Yes, that's right.
You've seen that one?
Who did it? Is it you?
Who you? Was it you? And Joe wanted John to try one more troubleshooting step, which is to plug the Apple TV 4K directly into the Mad VR and then output from the Mad VR into the JBL Pre-Pro. That way, John might be able to determine if it truly is just the Mad VR that is causing the lip sync problem. Yeah. Another interesting idea there. Hey, Rob, should we answer some questions?
Oh, yeah. Question and answer podcast, which we're like, with the contribution from the conversation that Tom and I had, I think we're about an hour and 20 minutes into this podcast now, but why not? Let's do it now.
Okay. Let's answer some questions. That is ostensibly what we do here.
That's right.
David A. has a question. Back in episode 930, which
we're on 937 now, so it's a little bit ago.
Yeah. All right. Wow, it won't be long, and we'll hit that big 4-digit. Back in episode 930, one of our listeners, Mark, took us through his basement home theater construction journey, even though Mark ended up having to move away to the other side of the country when a new job opportunity came along. I remember that one.
Yeah.
Well, David listened with great interest, and he had several questions about some of the things that Mark mentioned. Mark mentioned using, quote, the home theater book as a guide during his build. Is that actually a specific book that can be purchased because it doesn't show up with just a simple Amazon search?
Ah, yes. Yeah, it has a different title. It's colloquially known as the Home Theater Book, and also that is the link in the website. It's just called the Home Theater Book. But yes, this is by author Kurt Palmy. You can access it via his website, kurtpalmy.com, and it is, / the Home Theater Book after that, which is where that colloquial name came from. But the actual title is Ultimate Guide to Designing and Building Your Dream Home Theater. So that is the official title that we're referring to. But yes, when you order through the website, it isn't just the text, which I believe is just, it's an ebook, electronic book, rather than a print version. Somewhere in the back of my head, it's ringing a bell that there was like a print-on-demand version available at one point, but I don't know if that's still the case. But nevertheless, there are also some videos and some audio interviews and things like that that are companion to the text as well, and all of it is useful information. So when Mark was mentioning the Home Theater Book, that's what we were talking about. We'll have the link to it. You can click in the show notes right to it.
Always be careful how you refer to your things.
Yeah, right.
That does get confusing. So, excuse me. Mark described adhering rigid insulation boards to the exposed concrete foundation walls, but also to the floor. David hadn't heard about putting rigid insulation on a basement foundation floor before, but he likes the idea. He gets that it would provide a thermal break, but where he lives, that is less of a concern. He's more interested in whether it provides decoupling for audio purposes. How thick should the rigid insulation on the floor be? Does your plywood or OBS subfloor still need to be fastened?
I guess that should be OSB. Sorry, oriented strand board. That's a typo. OSB.
That's right.
Yes.
I just, I'm like Anker Man. I just read whatever you put.
Fixed now.
Does your plywood or OSB subfloor still need to be fastened to the concrete foundation below? And how would it all function as decoupling? Interesting.
Yeah. So
because decoupling's the main thing.
Well, in terms of,
as far as
trying to stop, physical vibration from getting into the physical structure of your building. And that is a challenge in any flooring situation, exactly how you go about that. So the sort of standard is I mean, it definitely depends on where you live and what the conditions are that you're dealing with in whatever basement that you have. In some cases, you are fully expecting that there is, even with, oodles of crushed gravel that is underneath your actual concrete foundation with proper weeping and drainage under there. If you're in a really, really moist area, concrete just wicks moisture. That is just a property of concrete. So
it is like a heavy sponge.
Yes, in many places you fully expect that no matter what you do in the construction, there is going to be moisture that wicks its way up through the bottom of your concrete foundation. Places like that, normally it's part of building code that you have at a minimum interior weeping as the standard, and some places, if it's not outright code, it's highly recommended that you have both interior and exterior weeping. But the point being, in any of those situations, in a basement subfloor where you're finishing what was just an exposed concrete foundation before, you would want to put down like a dimpled plastic or a grooved, channeled insulation layer that has nothing to do with thermal. It's just about providing a little air gap for any moisture. We're not talking about flood in your basement. That's a completely different thing.
Right,
We're just talking that little bit of moisture that wicks its way through the concrete in places where that's bound to happen, so that you have that little bit of airflow and there's somewhere for that moisture to go to get to the interior weeping that should be built into your foundation. So that is going to be the first layer on top of your concrete in many places. But in some places, they absolutely do not have that problem. You would only have exterior weeping and waterproofing outside. The whole idea is to prevent any water from getting to the outside surface of the concrete to begin with, and it isn't a type of habitat where you're going to have that inevitably get that wicking into the concrete foundation. So in places like that, you can put down a layer of rigid insulation directly on top of the concrete rather than having the dimple plastic under it. So where I live, we're always going to have moisture problems. We have like pre-made tiles, like 2 foot by 2 foot tiles that have channeled, grooved hard plastic on the bottom, then a 3/4 inch layer of insulation, which is almost always either 3/4 inch or 1 inch rigid insulation, and then either plywood or OSB directly on top of that. And it's like a pre-made 2 foot by 2 foot sandwich that you can just bring in through any doorway, and you lay them down almost like Lego blocks on top of your concrete foundation, and you're ready to go. And they're tongue and groove. They lock together. You want to make sure that they're nice and tight together because they actually have like a little it doesn't fully cure, a little bit of almost like acoustic caulk layer that's in between each of them so that they squeeze right together and there's no water that's going to get through that. So you have to be careful with installation. But in other places, you just buy big 4 foot by 8 foot sheets of like dry core rigid insulation, and you put that right down against your concrete, and you're ready to put whatever subflooring, plywood or OSB directly on top of it. Now, most places do require that something is structurally connected to that concrete subfloor. There are absolutely people all over YouTube who are like, I 100% floated my floor, but building code in almost every place says you're not really supposed to do that. There is supposed to be a true structural connection from the subfloor to it, and typically just adhesive to the underside of the insulation would not be sufficient for that. But almost everywhere, the amount of, you're just using Tapcons, just concrete screws. So you just drill a hole through all the layers into the concrete, and then you just hammer drill that Tapcon screw right down into the concrete foundation. In many, many, many places, the nailing schedule, the number that you have to put into a 4 by 8 foot sheet of plywood or OSB is 6 Tapcons for the whole thing. So that's like
for the whole sheet.
So that's, the corners and 2 in the middle, 2 in the field, which is really, really minimal. But that's just there to prevent shifting. Some places, if it's earthquake territory, it's going to be, the nailing schedule is going to be higher. You have to have more securement than that. But yes, in almost all cases, there does have to be some kind of undercoat, some kind of direct, actual physical screwed in connection to that concrete foundation. So then the question becomes, is that truly decoupled? Well, of course not. Of course, it's not truly decoupled anymore. And also, the rigid insulation underneath is not a great decoupler. You're changing the density of the materials, but it's rigid insulation. It will still conduct vibration through its physical vibration will still conduct through it. So if you contact places like Soundproofing Company to get their advice on how to construct a full room within a room, they are going to have whatever that structural subfloor layer is. That's, some kind of concrete foundation, layer of insulation for that full thermal and water break, and then a layer of plywood or OSB. In most places, they would recommend that you have a second layer of plywood or OSB that is not adhered to the foundation. The second layer is only adhered to the first layer. And that's really just to prevent squeaks. that's almost
while you're walking around.
Almost entirely what that second layer is about, is preventing squeaks. But what Soundproofing Company would have you do is you have that first structural layer, and then you put a layer of their Serene Mat or other, like it's a compliant rubber, quite thick, 3/4 of an inch thick in many cases, compliant rubber type of underlayment, and then your second layer of OSB. Or in many cases, if you're just doing carpet, it could go right on top of that squishy rubber layer. But that's your decoupling layer, is that rubber squishy layer, because nothing below that is squishy. And squishiness is necessary for decoupling, or damping is what we're really talking about. So yeah, I don't know for sure exactly the details of what Mark did, but in terms of what would be building code, that's what we'd be talking about.
I feel like the next section of his question was answered by you just then. Yeah. Right? So I'm going to move on to the next section.
Just to touch upon it, you're building the walls on top of the subfloor you just built. In the cases where, because sometimes what people do is the concrete foundation is basically still, like, you could still get to it. They just lay carpet, maybe with a thick underpad, like directly on top of the concrete foundation. And code allows you to do that. If you can still access the original foundation, there's nothing wrong with that. But that means, where do the floor plates, the bottom plates of your walls that you're constructing, where do they go? Well, they have to be affixed to something. So it's fine for if you've done the minimum code nailing schedule, you got the 6 tapcons going into your 4x8 foot sheets of plywood. Those are adhered to the floor. Well, then you can put your bottom plates of your walls. The only thing they attach to is that subfloor. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, again, check your local building codes. All you have to do is go to City Hall. They'll give you all the building codes. But in most cases, that's what you have to do. But if you say
all you have to do, and there's immediately my brain thinks, that sounds like it's going to be difficult.
It's not difficult.
I just know how some cities are.
Oh, I know. And some people don't, they don't want to pull the permits for things that need permits and all that type of stuff. And they worry about it. So I get it. But I'm just saying, if you want everything to be completely above board, there's never going to be a problem with your home insurance, all of that type of stuff, then make that visit to City Hall. And often you can do it online to get that type of information. And that's the way you would go about it. But yes, if you're doing the thing where you really have not put any new subfloor above the concrete foundation, and that has not been secured to the concrete foundation in any way, then those bottom plates of the walls would have to themselves be secured to the concrete foundation, and then you have whatever floating floor is within those walls that you just built.
The other thing floating through my mind, living in a small city where I am, is I would have to stand there every moment and explain to whoever was building this for me, unless I'm building it physically myself, got my tools, I'm all by myself, I'm going to have to stand there and explain every bit of this and insist, I don't care how you've always done it. This is what you're doing for me right now. Like that's good. I don't know how, that can't just be an Alabama thing, but finding people to do good work here is quite something. And finding people to both do good work and do this unusual stuff, I don't know who I would have to get here.
Well, when it comes to securing like the bottom plate of your walls to whatever you're securing them to, there are damped bolts that you can get, right? It basically just has a rubber gasket around the head of the bolt. And so you use that to secure the bottom plates of your walls if you want to have that damped decoupled solution. That exists. You can do it that way.
That's a large version of how I've attached the hard drives in the computer that I'm recording on
rubber
right now.
grommets.
Little tiny rubber grommets. That's right. So David was considering sound clips and hat channels for his ceiling, but he loved the idea of interleaving new ceiling joists in between the structural ceiling joists. To him, it seems like he could save some room height that way. But doesn't that leave precious little space within the ceiling joist bays? How can any ducting or in-ceiling lights or speakers be installed? And since the new ceiling joists aren't actually supporting any weight above them, can they just be 2x4s?
So again, I don't know if there'd be any building code on that because they aren't structural supports. I've rarely seen anything that's even like these interleaved ceiling joists being less than a 2x6, because the only thing that's holding them up is the non-load bearing walls that you've constructed inside in this room within the room. So it's pretty rare. Like, you just don't want something that's, has the chance of warping or twisting or bowing after you've installed it, because that's going to ruin your drywall finish that you're putting up there. So I don't think I've ever seen less than 2x6s as the new ceiling joists. But if what you're really concerned about most, also just if you are using 2x6s and they're interleaved and they're extending below the structural ceiling joists by an inch or two, then often there will still be enough room above, because the structural ceiling joist should be, I know minimum code is 2x8s, but they should be 2x10s or 2x12s. So, but still ducting might not fit, so that can be a consideration. But if what you're mostly concerned about is trying to preserve as much ceiling height as you possibly can, I wouldn't do any of those solutions. What I would do is go to ISO Store and get their hush frames. They work exactly, the principle of them is exactly the same as the sound clips and hat channels. But they are basically just a pre-made, pre-damped solution where you're securing one end of the hush frame into the existing ceiling joist, and then the other end is secured to the first end with a rubber squishy material that gives it a damping factor, and that you have hang just below, just clear of the structural joists. So that takes care of all your leveling, and it's the absolute minimum clearance that you could possibly get away with is using the hush frames. And they actually cost less than sound clips and hat channels. So in my opinion, there's no downside to them.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
It was mentioned that Mark used flexible HVAC ducting and then installed a dedicated air return on the opposite side of the room to promote airflow. Is that sufficient to isolate the flanking path of the HVAC, or does more need to be done if you want a really, really soundproof theater?
So soundproofing company, I always defer to them. They used to have a lot more information on essentially building sound mufflers for your HVAC, like a full air exchange where you don't have anything in your actual theater physically connected to any part of your heating or cooling system. You are actually heating and cooling an adjacent room and then using a muffler system to exchange air between the two rooms. But that means you have to have a room of approximately the same size directly adjacent to your theater to do the air exchange, which is a tremendous amount of space and cost that most people absolutely are not going to have. So the typical approach is what you need to have is a non-rigid connection to any part of your HVAC system from within the theater, and that includes the air return, right? So you're going to want to have one of those decoupled. It's usually either a canvas joint or some type of pliable, joint in between the two sides of the air return duct in addition to the feed ducts. So it isn't actually necessary sound-wise to have the entire ducting inside of your home theater be flexible duct. It's typically easier to work with at that point once you've made the transition. But it's the similar idea as like the hush frames that I just talked about. You could have a rigid thing on either side, but then the flexible piece in between, that sort of just acts as a circuit breaker for the vibrations going through there. That's sort of what we're talking about. But yeah, in terms of disrupting that flanking path, you want that flexible connection. It's often the air return that people aren't thinking about. And that's a big, rigid, in most cases, connection all the way back to your furnace. You have to have that like shock absorber section at some point in between it.
So just always think squishy stuff in between rigid stuff.
And the other thing you would do is you want if you're going to have like a flanged opening into your theater, right? You want the fat biggest opening in your theater, which is going to slow down the speed of the air coming in, but
less whooshing.
Yes, it'll quiet the sound. That can mean you have to have proper calculation of what the cubic feet per minute going through your ducts need to be, because now you don't have the velocity of the air coming in and moving that through your theater. In order to get the transfer, how many cubic feet of air are moving through this theater, you have to have a proper HVAC specialist do that calculation for you. But that's the other side of it.
All right. Well, he has one more. David has one more little bit to his questioning. Mark said he insulated inside all of the theater's walls and the ceiling. Would that just be regular bat insulation or something that is sprayed in? Would either insulation solution negate any of the decoupling?
So it just has to be not rigid. Right. So if we're talking about
squishy in between rigid.
Yeah. If we're talking about spray foam insulation, there's the two types, right? There's the closed cell, which becomes rigid insulation. And then there's the open cell, which remains squishy. And that's okay. As long as it's squishy and pliable and can move, it doesn't really matter. But there's nothing wrong for the insulation that is going in your basement ceiling or whatever ceiling that is only there for soundproofing purposes. There's nothing wrong with going with the cheapest, easiest to work with, because I mean we don't have to worry about it holding its shape up there. We're not making panels or anything like that. You can go with the cheapest. It's typically the white that is meant to go above garages, right?
Yeah,
that they just put in. That's the cheapest, easiest stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that because all the insulation inside your ceiling and in fact inside of your decoupled walls for theater purposes, all it's there to do is for any sound that does make it through the drywall layer, for any vibrations that get through there and would resonate inside the cavity of your ceiling joists or your wall bays, that's all the insulation is there to disrupt, to make those sound waves collide with material, turn themselves into heat, and not resonate inside those bays. That's all it's there to do.
I've been in rooms that had insulation on the inside of a house, and I swear you can tell a difference. Yeah. You just standing there.
That's right.
It feels
and
different.
If you ever knock on the walls, you can absolutely hear the difference. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, not rigid. Don't put anything rigid in there.
All right. It is now time for new questions.
Look at that. We made
Don't
it.
know what
An
are we
hour
up to,
and a half
maybe a
in.
couple hours or so.
Hour and 40 minutes in.
Something like that. We're going to start some new questions for this week on AVRant, your question and answer podcast for home theater. Tony has questions. Tony uses an Onkyo RZ50 AV receiver to power what he says is a 6.4.1 configuration. I don't know why I said that sentence like that. That sounded sarcastic. I'm like, he says.
Well, that's the way I wrote it. Yes. And I'm doing that to add a little correction in here because I think this is very common. I see this all the time.
His so-called 641 configuration, but we're pretty sure he means 614. Either way, no center speaker.
Yeah, because so I see this frequently, including on forums and stuff like that. And it's like, it's not a big deal. We can absolutely get to what you actually meant. But just in terms of like, if we're going to have an easy, smooth flowing conversation, just adhering to what the current industry standards are for nomenclature when it comes to these things, I kind of doubt that he has 6 floor level speakers, 4 subwoofers, and 1 overhead speaker. And in fact, I know that isn't the case because later on he talks about having a pair of rear height speakers. So it's 6.1.4. We stay with the original, 5.1, 7.1 like we used to have. Floor level speakers, how many subwoofers, and then the third number is how many overhead speakers we have. So it'll be a 6.1.4, no center speaker in this case, front, left, and right, phantom center.
When he first started listening to some home theater podcasts, he started to feel like he must have been a fool for using a phantom center, since so many of them stress the importance of the center speaker. But then he heard our stance on the subject, and he was happy to hear someone lay out the reasoning for why not having a center speaker in your setup is okay.
It sure is. Yes.
It can
have a very good phantom center.
I'm pretty pro center speaker, but that's just because in my situation and the way I lay on the couch,
You're
I
off
prefer
axis.
it. I'm way off axis, flopped over on the armrest, and I kind of need the center to lock something to the screen. So I'm very pro center.
But if you are sitting equidistant from your front left and right speakers, you can have a fantastic phantom center experience. And like where we agree with everyone else is, if you do have a center speaker, it needs to be one that keeps up with your front, left, and right speakers. Don't get some really, really dinky, underpowered center speaker. Just, I don't know why you would at this point, but don't have a complete mismatch across your front 3. We agree. Your center speaker needs to be as good as your front, left, and right speakers. But other than that, you can do without one. Phantom center works great.
That's right. So at the moment, Tony mostly uses Netflix, and he decided to only pay for the standard tier. He didn't want any ads, but he questioned whether Netflix's 4K, HDR, and Dolby Atmos feature upgrades were really worth the significantly higher priced premium tier. I'd say the HDR is. So with the standard tier, he's getting 1080p SDR and 5.1 audio signals, which is not bad.
No.
But as mentioned, he has a full Atmos speaker configuration, so he defaulted to applying upmixing.
Mm-hmm.
He's been disappointed with the lack of utilization of his surround back speakers when doing so. Either they don't make any sound at all in a lot of cases, or when they do make a little bit of sound, they don't really seem to match the placement of sounds as they're depicted in the movie scene, and it makes him feel as though the sounds are now improperly mixed. He has tried running some actual Dolby Atmos demo scenes from other sources, and those sound quite impressive to him, but he's assuming that's to be expected. Yes. Is it just the norm that upmixing a 5.1 source signal to an Atmos speaker configuration sounds so much less impressive? Yes. What has been our experience with upmixing? And are all of the upmixers the same, at least in the typical Onkyo and Denon AV receivers that we most frequently recommend? I mean, the whole point is accurate placement of sounds around your room.
Yes.
I don't know about that upmixing.
Well, yeah. So I mean, because if you have something that was like purposely mixed for Dolby Pro Logic 2X.
Yes.
And we don't see that as a name of an available upmixer anymore because Dolby Surround in Dolby's versions has supplanted it. But if it was fully mixed in that, then that's going to make, it still is up to what the mixers actually put in there. But as far as the signal, the original signal, if it was intended for Dolby Pro Logic 2X, it can absolutely have quite precise surround back speaker placement.
Now that specifically is like changing the phase of sounds or something so that you actually,
in the case of Dolby Pro Logic, it was fully matrixed into the sounds. The sounds really did begin discreetly, and then the signal is simply matrixed into the available channels. When it comes to, the more fudging it, then it's just looking at common phase and level information and timing information between various channels and going, okay, well, if we have the same level and phase and timing between the two surround channels, then that's probably supposed to be centered behind you, so we can pull that out and put it into your surround back speakers and do the effect that way. But yeah, in terms of like a lot of stuff is mixed in 5.1, like there's a lot of stuff that it's a 5.1 signal, but predominantly it really is just the front left and right, or maybe the front left right center. There's barely any information in the surrounds, let alone surround backs, let alone anything that might have gone overhead. Again, if it was purposely mixed in Dolby Pro Logic 2Z with some height information, Dolby Surround's going to do Dolby Surround upmixer is going to do a great job of pulling that up into your height speakers. But there, not a lot of content that was really intended to sound like it was coming from overhead prior to the existence of Atmos. So there absolutely is an audible difference, in my opinion, between the Dolby Surround mixer and the DTS Neural X upmixer. The DTS Neural X upmixer, in my opinion, they've opted to try and make it so that you notice your overhead and surround speakers more. They absolutely, unquestionably goose the level of the overhead sounds. Anything that gets put into the overhead speakers in DTS Neural X is 10 decibels louder than it would be in the Dolby Surround upmixer. They're trying to get you to notice that those speakers are up there.
It makes sense. That's one thing I've heard so many times from people who are new to any sort of home theater. As soon as you put 5 speakers in their room, they expect to hear 5 speakers all the time.
That's what a lot of people want to do. So, in my opinion, I, on a personal level, prefer the Dolby Surround upmixer because it's the most subtle. Because it doesn't do a lot of re-steering of sounds from the original 5.1 mix. It mostly leaves it alone, but where it truly makes sense in the phase and level and timing information, it'll throw a couple of sounds occasionally overhead or behind or something like that, but it's very subtle. It's hard to notice. I personally like that, but if you're wanting to notice the speakers you installed, I would absolutely try giving DTS Neural X a try instead, because that's in the Onkyo RZ50. You can do the cross-pollination. You're absolutely allowed to apply the DTS Neural X upmixer to your Dolby Digital 5.1 signals instead. So, that doesn't cost you anything. 100% give that a try. But you also have an RZ50 Onkyo, which is THX certified. And you have the THX listening modes available to you as well. And in the THX listening mode, if you go to the movie mode, it will put sound into your surround back speakers. It's mostly just mimicking what's already in your surround speakers, but it will definitely duplicate sounds. If you're just like, I just want sounds to be coming out of those speakers because I bought them and I put them there.
I hooked them up.
Then try that THX listening modes. I like the THX game listening mode because it is the most, when what I'm wanting is the most discrete placement of sounds. No blending. It'll do its best to lock a sound into one speaker only in the THX game listening mode. So, I mean, this is all experiments that you can do because it's not costing you a thing in terms of money, and you already have the equipment that can do it. Absolutely experiment with those other upmixing listening modes. You might find one that you like a lot more than Dolby Surround. Totally.
Yeah. Absolutely. So a bit about his room and speaker setup. The room itself is roughly 18 feet by 18 feet. His seats are about 4 feet away from the back wall. And despite the size of the room, he has limitations on where his speakers can physically be placed, as we all do.
Yeah.
So his surround back speakers are basically in the rear corners of the room. His rear height speakers are 7.5 feet directly above those surround back speakers. That's on up there. And his surround speakers are on the side walls 6 feet in front of the surround backs. So if you've been keeping track, that means his surround speakers are actually a couple of feet in front of his seats.
Yeah.
So he is aware that this is not ideal speaker placement according to any of the diagrams or advice online. This is true. It should surround you. But it's what physically and aesthetically works in his room, so it is what it is.
Okay.
At some point, he heard us describe how to easily wire 2 pairs of side surround speakers in series. And since he's been so unimpressed by the utilization of his surround back speakers when applying upmixing, he decided to give that a try by wiring his surround and surround back speakers on each side together, creating a 4.1.4 configuration, but with 2 speakers playing each surround channel together.
Yeah.
He did rerun Dirac, although just the 3 mic position procedure, since it was just a quick experiment that he wanted to try. Much to his surprise, he thought it sounded considerably better. I'm not surprised. He used a scene in Godzilla -1 to test things out. Part of a train gets tossed off screen to the left, and with his surround and surround back speakers wired together in series, it really sounded like something had actually crashed into the large picture window that is positioned in between those 2 speakers on the left. So much so that he actually paused the movie and went and checked on the window to make sure that something hadn't coincidentally hit it in real life.
Yes.
I think I've done that before.
Well, I've done it with like a door knock. Yeah, I've done that in movies, yeah.
Like, oh, somebody's here. Pause. He will admit that when he switched back to his original 6.1.4 configuration, he definitely had expectation bias since he really, really wants to utilize all of the speakers he has already purchased and installed. But doing his best to ignore that admitted bias, he thinks it clearly sounded worse going back to 6.1.4 upmixing versus having the 4.1.4 configuration with the surrounds and surround backs wired together in series. So would we actually recommend that he keeps his system wired that way? Since Netflix is mostly what he watches, would it actually make sense to forego the option of running discrete surround back speakers in his case? I think so. And does it make sense, given his setup, to use 2 pairs of side surround speakers, even though he only has a single row of seats and primarily cares about just one listening position? I mean, immediately I'm listening to someone say, I did this other thing and it sounded better.
Sure.
Okay, do that. And also my mind immediately thinks, okay, you have your surround speaker that's supposed to be at least off to your side or a little behind you.
Right.
You have it in front of you.
Slightly in front of
and
you.
Then your surround back speaker, you're not getting from it what you would like.
And it's not actually behind you, it's in the rear corner. So it's behind and to your side.
So by connecting those 2, Rob, is it fair to say we've created one long surround side speaker?
You've done to a very limited extent what you find in a commercial movie theater, right? You have that whole bank of surround speakers along the sides of the movie theater. Some of them, unless you're sitting in the front row, are in front of you, and some of them are directly to your sides, and some of them are behind you. But they're typically in a theater, like all playing in unison, unless it's a true Dolby Atmos configuration where they can be used discreetly. But even there, they're often used as arrays. The entire bank of speakers on either side are playing in unison together. You've done that to a very limited extent. It's 2 on either side, but you've done the same thing. So having a good experience and a 5.1 sound mix where you're now using a limited array of side surround speakers, I mean, you're doing what they do in the movie theater to a smaller extent. So that would be fine. The only thing I would say is, yes, it does preclude you from ever using discrete surround backs in your setup, which, like I say, aren't actually properly positioned, so maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. But I mentioned those THX listening modes. The THX listening mode does what you're doing without rewiring anything. It duplicates the sound of your side surround speakers in the surround backs when it's doing its version of upmixing. So I have a strong suspicion you are going to enjoy the THX listening mode. Now, there are two in your RZ50. There's the standard THX cinema, music, and game listening modes. Give them all a try. But there's also, they separated out the THX Select cinema, music, and game listening modes. By all means, go ahead and give them all a try, but the THX Select ones won't put any sounds into the overheads. They are the classic 7.1 THX Select listening modes. So if you want to use all the speakers you've installed, then don't use the THX Select version. Use the original THX version, which I think you'll like without rewiring anything.
Interesting. So now he needs to compare his rewired in-series speaker solution to
the THX listening mode version.
THX listening mode upmixing solution. But again, all that's free.
That's right.
If you've got the time and you enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
So his next question makes sense. Is he making all of this way more complicated than it needs to be? We all do it. And what he should actually do is just throw some extra money at Netflix to get their premium tier. Would the Atmos versions sound way better in his setup with the 6.1.4 configuration, or is Atmos from Netflix not really that impressive? And further, are most of the recent movies on Netflix even available in Atmos, or would he still need to resort to upmixing in a lot of cases, even with the premium tier? I see the Atmos logo a lot. I have the premium tier. And the 4K is kind of beautiful. The HDR is definitely beautiful. So if you can take advantage of those things, I would recommend throwing a little more money at it, although I am a cheapskate and I don't like throwing more money at something that doesn't make me happier.
And also, I mean, if you tried it for 1 month and then went back, is that so much cost? To try it for 1 month. I think it's worth trying for 1 month because you can always go back. It's month to month. You're not signing up for the entire year. You don't have to. So I would try it for 1 month. Now, anything that is like Netflix original, like Netflix made it themselves and put it on their service, almost all of that does have Atmos. I mean, not literally everything, but almost all of it does. But as far as the movies that they are just licensing from studios, a lot of those are still just 5.1. A lot of those, even though they have Atmos versions available on Netflix, the ones that they're licensing from the studios are typically still 5.1 and not Atmos. So it's not like it's going to be universal. You go to the premium tier and everything is suddenly discrete Atmos. Absolutely not. But yeah, since so much of it is Netflix original content, most of that is. And like I say, if you find that the THX listening mode upmixing is to your liking, you can keep the wiring you have, you can keep the option of discrete surround backs, and that would let you enjoy Atmos soundtracks when they are actually Atmos.
Sure. And now he's going to throw us a curveball. He has a plan in mind to move his Onkyo RZ50 receiver to another room in his house and buy himself a new receiver around Black Friday. So he was thinking he might like to try something a little different in the hopes that maybe he'll like something other than Onkyo with Dirac a bit better. He hasn't come across anything that would indicate simply switching from Dirac to Odyssey for room correction would have any impact on how upmixing steers the sounds into his 6.1.4 speaker configuration.
That's correct. Yeah, I wouldn't change any of that.
No. Some people claim the two room correction programs sound different, but not in the sense of how upmixed sounds are steered.
Yeah.
So he got a bit excited when he read about Sony's newest ES receivers that come with Sony's 360 spatial sound mapping to virtually reposition your speakers and expand the sound field. Is that maybe what he's looking for? He's seen some reviews on it that have been quite positive. Is it a completely different proprietary upmixer that is all its own? Would it provide him with better utilization of his surround back speakers when listening to 5.1 sources? And would it decode actual Dolby Atmos content differently? I mean, we're just getting into more processing here.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if that's what you're talking about, like true virtual repositioning of speakers, what you want is a Trinov. And you're not in that price range.
Don't even.
That's the one that's actually doing it. The 360 spatial sound mapping, this is one of those cases where sometimes people turn it on, and I mean, it's predominantly, it was in their sound bars and in their like the 4 speaker soundbar alternative that they had, the HTA1, and they got their new one. I think they called it just Bravia something or other, because everything is just Bravia something now. But their whole marketing was like, oh, basically just position the speakers. They don't have to be equal heights on the left and right. They don't have to be equal distances from your TV. Like, just position them anywhere roughly to the left and right, in front and behind you, and we'll activate this 360 spatial mapping feature, and it'll like virtually reposition everything so it sounds correct. And it's like, yeah, you throw it on there and there's some difference in sound, and it does the sort of general thing that like a lot of headphone processing or stereo signal processing does, where, yeah, it does sound like the room got bigger because it does that little bit of phase manipulation, and a little bit of reverb is added to the rear channels, and it does that sort of thing. And initially, it can sound impressive for some things. You listen to it long enough, and you always hear the artifacts or the mistakes that it makes. And it's like, how tolerant are you of those things? Me, I'm zero tolerant of them.
Yeah, zero.
I can't stand it. But so it's one of those where, like, yeah, if you're just doing a review and you're like, oh, I flicked it on, it's like, yeah, I did hear a difference. It sounded like it got better, and it sounded like my center speaker raised up or lowered down, or it sounded like my left speaker that I purposely positioned, too high or something. Like, it kind of brought that more in focus. But you listen to it on an ongoing basis, day after day after day, and you will hear artifacts and mistakes that it makes. It's just unavoidable in the processing that it's doing. So I don't love it. I don't think it's the solution. It's not the equivalent of Trinov. The measurement process is nowhere close to as extensive and legitimate as what Trinov is doing with their genuine 3-dimensional microphone that you have to very, very carefully position when you're taking Trinov measurements. The Sony measurement thing is like the soundbar version. You do it on your phone, for Pete's sakes. It's completely not the equivalent at all. It's better. It's better than the old like pure just expansion reverb, hall effect, rock concert effect. Like, it's better than those.
Yeah, like my Yamaha amplifier processing. They still have these old-fashioned just echo chamber stuff. I don't know why they keep including it.
Yeah, it's
somebody out there wants their movies to sound like a church. I don't know who that person is. It's absolutely better
than those, but in my opinion, it's a little bit closer to those than it is to Trinov, which is what you're describing that you really want. So I'm not hugely in favor of it. That's just my personal take.
So far, I'm liking his idea of putting his speakers in series. I actually really like that for him because of where his speakers are. What about Sony's digital cinema auto calibration versus direct? He hasn't found anything in the way of objective data to describe exactly what Sony's room correction program does to the signal. So can we offer any insight as to how it compares to either Dirac or Odyssey on that front? I'm guessing it's not doing much different than good old Odyssey or anything else.
You get to take 2 measurement positions, which is not enough. You don't get to do spatial averaging or proper triangulation or steering or anything with 2 measurement positions. I don't think it's that great. That's my take. Like, I don't think it's that great. Like, again, it's like you get those initial impressions, and it's like it's not accurate in my experience. It's not going for pure accuracy. It tends to boost the bass a bit, boost the treble a bit. You get a bit of a V-knot shape in it, as far as I can tell. Which again, it's like instantaneous initial impression. You turn that on. You turn on the 3D spatial sound mapping. It's like, oh, I hear more details in the treble. The bass seems louder, which it is because it turned it up. It's the room sounds expansive and larger. It's like, oh, that's all initially impressive. Again, you live with it long enough, and you're just like, nah, it's not accurate to the signal anymore. That's what goes on. So I'm not a huge fan of Sony's room correction or their 3D spatial sound mapping. Like I said, I mean, it definitely is better than a lot of the old, pure phase-based stuff that we used to have. But I wouldn't do it. So my take is, I think you're actually going to be happy with those THX listening modes. Certainly give them a try. If you are, then keep the RZ50 in the theater, because that's doing a lot of solutions that, like, if you went to a non-THX certified receiver, which is basically everything except Onkyo these days, you wouldn't have that option anymore. So I think it would make sense for whatever other room to get a different, less costly AV receiver up there and keep the RZ50 if that THX listening mode works out for you. That's what I suspect.
And try 1 month of premium Netflix.
Yeah, for sure.
Just try it. It's that's worth a try for sure. Okay, Norman has questions. Norman says he was about to buy a new Samsung TV, but while he was researching, he came across their announcement from back at CES 2024 in January, where they said, along with Google, that their new IAMF immersive audio model and formats would be coming out at the end of this year. There doesn't seem. Do what now?
I scoff at that.
Yes, I immediately scoff at that. There doesn't seem to have been any further information about this new supposed rival to Dolby Atmos.
I scoff even harder.
Yes. What are they trying? And DTSX since then. Mm-hmm. And Norman even tried calling Samsung tech support to ask, but their own techs don't know anything about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So How much FOMO should he have about this?
Less than zero.
FOMO.
Yeah, that's right.
No FOMO.
No.
From what was written about it back in January, it seems as though YouTube will be the only service to utilize it at first. And there were mentions that certain Samsung TV models and soundbars might get it as a firmware update, but absolutely zero concrete details or promises. Should he hold off on buying a new Samsung TV until more information about IAMF becomes available? No. How long should he wait? Zero. Mm-hmm. Am I answering that correctly, Rob?
I completely agree. I couldn't possibly care less about this thing.
This sounds like Samsung scrambling to find something that they can put on a little promo to why you should buy their TV when you're in the store. It's got this fancy feature, and it works on YouTube. Look.
Right. No, all this is so that YouTube can continue on sending you nothing but stereo 2-channel audio signals while being able to claim that there's some kind of immersive audio format available from YouTube. That's right. All this is.
So don't wait, get a good TV. Yeah. This is not a thing. And he already has a Samsung Q950A soundbar, which was first released in 2021. Do we think a soundbar model that old is likely to get IAMF support, or will he need to buy a new soundbar as well if he wants IAMF? Just keep your soundbar if you like it. Yeah. Please stop thinking about IAMF.
No, I mean, IAMF, even when they were talking about it back at CES 2024, was all about stereo system playback.
Yeah.
Stereo signals, built-in TV speakers, trying to give you a sense of fake immersive audio. That's right. All this format is about. Yeah, which... Look,
there is so much in this world that's just weird echo.
Yeah.
Like all these invented sort of surround modes are just weird echo. Like the best you can do with a soundbar is aim high frequencies at the walls to your side or the ceiling and bounce it back to you. You can't invent with echo and reverb surround sound.
And we have so many alternatives to this already. Like, look, I know Samsung, for whatever reason, they don't like Dolby. You know, they begrudgingly include Dolby Atmos decoding via HDMI ARC, because if they didn't, they know that, I mean, they to this day do not support Dolby Vision. They're the only ones who don't support Dolby Vision, because I don't know what it is between Samsung, whatever beef they have with Dolby. It's kind of strange. Google did their experiment for a little while. You could get 5.1 Dolby Digital from YouTube, but they did away with that and just went back to stereo. And that's the only thing. So, I mean, whatever beef is going on between these companies and Dolby, they're trying to introduce this alternative, but you don't have to. Like, DTS will happily let you use DTS Virtual X on anything you want to use. I don't know what the royalty is, but it isn't as much as Dolby charges, because they're so far behind in that category. And it's like, but you could use that. You could go ahead and put DTS Virtual X. It works pretty nicely, honestly. So I don't know why they're bothering with this thing. I mean, it's purely on the YouTube side. It's the only side.
Yeah, it's purely to say we have a thing that someone else doesn't. That's all it is.
Don't wait. Don't worry. No. Negative FOMO on this. If somebody brought out a TV and they marketed that they have IAMF on it now, I would avoid that just out of spite. I think this thing is as stupid as it could possibly be. We
need a new acronym for the opposite of FOMO, like fear of taking part.
Yeah, that's right.
Fat P.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Fear of, don't make me do this. I have fear I'll have to do this. All right, let's move on to Stefan. And again, I think I must ask. I'm saying that right?
That's
Stefan?
How I've been saying it. He's never corrected us. Yes. I don't know for sure, but we've just been saying Stefan.
Because part of my brain says, maybe that's Stefan.
It could be.
But Stefan, if it's okay to say Stefan, tell us if we need to say it a different way.
He seems to have recognized we're talking about him, so we're good on that front. We've accomplished the communication.
Because he was paying attention, and now he's got some additional information for us. Right. Stefan says, it wasn't a typo, and I remember this very clearly when Stefan wrote that he needs 3-meter HDMI cables to go between the components in his equipment rack and a 10-meter HDMI cable to go from his rack to his TV. We thought that maybe he actually meant 3 feet and 10 feet when we were just looking at his diagram.
That's right.
But the units he had typed were no mistake. Mm-hmm. He made that equipment rack himself, and he included cable guideways with a scissor-like action that run between the shelves. They make installation and troubleshooting easy, since he can slide any piece of equipment forward to access its rear panel without disconnecting anything. But he does need longer lengths of cable as a result, so 3 meters is the correct length for HDMI cables within his rack. He sent pictures, it looks really cool.
Yeah, I like it a lot. And it would be very convenient. You could just slide it out forward. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry we didn't know, because this looks really cool. Then from the rack to the inside of his theater where the TV is located, he's got a conduit that snakes its way under his sliding door, then back up to the ceiling, then across and back down. So again, it ends up being longer than you might expect, and a 10-meter HDMI cable is needed there. Anyways, Rob pointed him to HDMI cables from RUI Pro, available from Amazon Belgium. He had never heard of the brand before, but they are indeed fully certified HDMI cables, and they have in-wall rated options. So he's willing to buy them on our say-so. But he did notice they are fiber optic and not just simple copper HDMI cables. Is that conversion anything to be concerned about? Is it possible that regular old copper HDMI cables would be more reliable? He saw some 10-meter copper HDMI cables for sale on that BOL website that he mentioned last week. Is it possible those would be the more reliable choice? I wouldn't think reliability would be a problem here. Rob?
Yeah, so in fact, for, I believe it's 16 feet is the maximum length copper HDMI cables that HDMI will certify for ultra high speed. I mean, I guess it all just comes down to signal integrity. So if someone could make one, but I don't think I've seen any length longer than 16 feet that has achieved that certification. So to go for 10 meters, approximately 33 feet, it would have to be fiber optic. That's the only way you'd get a certified ultra high speed. And since he has this brand new OLED, which can absolutely do HDMI 2.1 types of things, and he's pulling it through a conduit and probably doesn't want to replace it in the not too distant future, there's no way I'd pull anything than an ultra high speed cable at this point. And for 10-meter length, it's going to have to be fiber optic. So the only thing to look out for is those are directional. There is a side of the HDMI cable that is labeled source, and there's a side that's labeled display. And those need to be plugged into the appropriate things that it says on those labels. If you plug them in backwards, you're going to have problems in the signal. So that's about the only thing to really make careful note of, because you are pulling it through a conduit, and that's going to be a hassle if you have to turn around the other way. But as long as you install the display labeled side to your TV and the source labeled side to the monitor out of your pre-pro, you are A-OK, and it is fully certified by HDMI LLC. It's going to work just fine.
Nice. He used to have a Yamaha receiver several years ago. Now he has his Arkham. Every so often, one of his speakers stops working. It's been going on for years, and the fix is always the same. He just unplugs his banana plugs on the back of his AV receiver, then plugs them back in, and everything goes back to working fine. He's been using the same speaker wire with the same banana plugs, which are soldered on ever since he had that 32-inch CRT television. Hey, here, another a 32-inch CRT comes back into the show.
That's the same Stefan who had that. So yes, ever since he had that, which is 2 decades or more ago at this point. Yeah, same speaker wires, same banana plugs.
Right. It's almost been 20 years for us. It was 2005 when we replaced the 32-inch CRT television. They're just the classic all brass compression style banana plugs. So since he's going to be rewiring his HDMI cables anyway, maybe it's finally time to replace those old banana plugs. What do we think? Are there any particular banana plugs we would recommend to him? First of all, I'm curious why that would ever happen. So the receiver is detecting a problem and shutting that amp off, or what?
No, it's, with the regular banana plugs, I mean, it's just a physical spring-like action, just a friction fit. And this far on, I mean, I'm certain if you examined the tips of those banana plugs, that little spring-like action is just compressed down. It's not springy anymore. It's just been, so I'm sure it's literally like having a loose cable. That's all it is at that point. Okay. It's like having a loose cable. So yes, absolutely. I think it's time to replace those banana plugs. Now, there's nothing wrong with the compression springy type banana plugs. They just will, after decades of use, lose their springiness. So you could get some very inexpensive ones and just replace them. That would be totally fine. But if you never want to have this problem ever again for as long as you live, and you're willing to spend a little bit that I think more than you really need to, but he said he really doesn't mind spending some money on the cables and things like this, then I would point you to locking banana plugs. If you have a look at these, I mean, they connect inside to your actual speaker wire exactly the same, just goes in through the end of the barrel, and either there's set screws or you splay the wire out on top and screw the top back down on top of it. Very easy, doesn't have to be soldered, although you can if you want to. But the tips that go into the binding post of your AV receiver, you actually twist the black plastic protective barrel that's on the end of these things, and that moves them up, pushing the pins up and splaying out the banana plug ends themselves. They lock into those, and when you release it, you have to unscrew them. So these are not relying on spring action. These will not wear out over time. They will lock, as their name implies, directly in there. So I found some nice ones on Amazon Belgium. They're selling 2 pairs of them for €19, which, you know, is not crazy expensive, but it's also not cheap.
If it's the last thing you're going to buy, that's no big deal. Yeah. I like that they're almost like a wall anchor.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Screw it, splays out. That's
right.
Great.
So yeah, I'll have a link to those ones.
So Rob, is this an okay time to move on? Because I do need to go do a few things, make a few phone calls. And
oh, sure.
Is this an okay time?
Yeah, that's fine
I
by
think
me.
We have fulfilled the people who desire 2 hours.
Oh, yes, certainly. As far as, keeping things going with Tom, I think, I might just do Manuel's question, and I think that'll be it. So that's perfectly fine if you want to head on out.
I would like to head on. I'm sorry to
not at
bump
all,
out
Matt,
on you that quick, but
thank you so much for filling in the way you have been. That is tremendous of you, and Tom, thanks you as well.
As time goes on, things will be better for me because I've got to go do some stuff for dear old mom, and her situation will get better as the weeks move on. And I hope Tom's situation gets a lot better. Yes. Again, I'm just crossing my fingers so hard for Tom and the insurance situation. It's like just good vibes for that insurance situation.
Absolutely.
That's the biggest headache. That's where he's going to be made whole and can do what he needs to do afterwards. And I hope his stress level gradually decreases as the weeks move on.
That would be nice. Yes.
It's rough.
So I don't know what the situation is going to be next week. Lee might be back. It might be someone different. It might be whatever is going on. We'll find out what happens at that time.
I'll be here if you need me here. No problem. But I guess I'll leave you to Manuel's question.
That's what we'll do.
Let me go take care of a couple of important things.
Sounds very good. Thank you.
It was good talking to you again, Rob.
Thank you again, Lee. And we'll probably see you next week.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so me carrying on my own, Manuel. Last week we discussed Manuel's setup, where he has a home theater all set up just the way that he likes, including his pair of SVS PB2000 subwoofers, but then he also has a DJ setup that uses for mixing music at home, and that's controlled with a Pioneer XDJ RR controller. And he uses a pair of JBL Eon 710 PA speakers that get fed by the XLR outputs from that DJ controller. So he told us how he's been using a Gemini subwoofer for his DJing setup, but it isn't really keeping up sound quality wise, bass extension wise. So he was hoping there'd be a convenient way to connect his controller, his DJ controller, to his SVS subs, but without messing up anything to do with his home theater setup and calibration. So first up, his SVS subs are indeed the PB2000s, not the PB2000 Pros. So he does not have the SVS app, and there is no easy way to set up separate presets that he could just pull up on his phone and switch between. So that's out as a potential solution. Second, he appreciated the suggestion for using a mini DSP Flex device. It would work as a solution for sure, but as we suspected, he isn't crazy about the $495 price tag. If there's no other way, then it is nice for him to know that it could work, it could function, and solve his setup, but he's hoping to keep the expense down, which we totally understand. So lastly, I suggested the idea of using front speakers A and front speakers B, if that option is available in his AV receiver. So he wrote back and says he's got a Marantz SR6014. That's the model of AV receiver he has. It does have the option for front A and front B speakers, but unfortunately, it isn't quite that simple. So the SR6014 can process up to a maximum of 11 speakers. It has 9 amplifiers built in, and he is running a 5.1.4 configuration, 9 speakers. So that whole speakers A, speakers B solution seemed very promising at first, since it could process 11 speakers, but just power 9 of them itself. But when he looks at the amp-assign options in the SR6014 settings, the only way to have front speakers B available is to set the amp assign to 7.1 plus front B. That's the only place where front B is mentioned. So with this particular Marantz model, if you want speakers B to be available, the only option is to have the receiver steal the height 2 outputs and use those as the front B speakers instead. So since he's already using both height 1 and height 2 in his 5.1.4 home theater configuration, he's asking, is there any way to actually do this? The running of a long RCA cable from his DJ controller to his Marantz receiver, that's no problem. He could plug that into the CD RCA inputs of the Marantz, just like we suggested, and then he could select the regular stereo listening mode, but with speakers B instead of speakers A. And if nothing is actually physically connected to the front B speaker outputs, that would let him play just his SVS subwoofers without changing any of the settings in the AV receiver for his home theater setup. The crossover would still be applied. He'd still be able to control the volume of just the subwoofer independently with the Marantz's volume knob, just like he wanted to do. But since he does have a pair of top rear speakers connected to those height 2 binding posts, he's like, will those end up playing some sound if he selects the front B output? Because that's the binding posts that are supposed to get stolen for front B purposes. Or will it even work at all if he keeps his current 5.1.4 configuration? So unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to just keep the 5.1.4 configuration completely as is, and then switch over to front B speakers. That would be like deactivated or like physically not connected. There isn't going to be a convenient way to do that. The SR6014 is old enough. It doesn't have the 2 separate presets as an option either. And yeah, even if you did, if you are in fact using the height 2 binding post to connect to your top rear speakers, then it would, if you had like presets 1 and 2 and you configured preset 1 as 5.1.4 and then configured preset 2 to be the 7.1 plus front B speakers, if you are using those actual binding posts on the receiver itself, it would end up outputting the stereo sound from the height 2 connection / front B connection. So if you were to get a right up to date Denon and Marantz receiver, there could be a way of doing this. But of course, that's spending a lot of money to get a whole new receiver, which is going to be more money than it would cost to get that mini DSP Flex. Because the newer ones, you would have the speaker preset 1 and speaker preset 2 that you could switch between. And you could choose to say that when I'm doing the 5.1.4 configuration, that I would actually only use the pre-outs for the height 2. That I wouldn't be sending any signal to the height 2 binding posts, but then you would need a separate 2-channel amplifier to power your top rear speakers. Like, we're spending way, way, way more money than just getting the mini DSP Flex. With your current Marantz, you could do the save and load feature for saving different configurations with different Odyssey runs for each of them. So you can save and load through the Odyssey editor app. That would be a way to have separate configurations, but it still doesn't solve the issue of the physical binding post connection. So I suppose since one of the no, even then, yeah, if you're doing 9 speakers in the main zone, there's just no way to do this. Unfortunately, I was trying to think through all the permutations of like using pre-outs only for the height 2s, which would necessitate only buying a 2-channel amplifier. But yeah, that option exists if you're doing an 11 speaker setup. Then you can say that, you know, the height 2 outputs is pre-outs only in one configuration, and then you could save and load a completely separate configuration through the Odyssey editor app. In which you would have the front B speakers physically connected to the back of the Marantz instead. But yeah, that's still spending money, and it still doesn't work in a 9-speaker configuration. It would only work in an 11-speaker configuration. So yeah, it's not great news. We're back to that mini DSP Flex as maybe being the best solution to exactly what you want to do here, where you're not changing any of the settings in the subwoofers themselves, and you're having that independent control of them when you're using the DJ controller. I wish I had a less costly and better solution for you, but the only other thing you could do is just compromise on your home theater setup and go down to a 5.1.2 configuration, because then you could set the amp assign as 7.1 plus front B. Your home theater doesn't use the height 2 connections at all anymore, and you only go with one pair of overhead speakers for your theater. So that's a pretty severe compromise, because you're losing that front to back steering when it's Atmos overhead. But that would be the zero money spent way of doing it. That would work with all of your current equipment. Alrighty, so I think I'll wrap it up there, because my voice is starting to give out, and we do have the extra half hour that's already been applied from when I was talking to Tom earlier. So I will say that Gurinder and Mark and Tim are already on the list, and we will get to your questions next week. So there we go. I think that's it for today. I will go back up to the top of this document to thank our listeners of the week, and we have quite a few. Richard, Karl, and Jason, and Niels, thank you all so much for sending money to Tom through the PayPal link. Come to avrant.com. Over on the right-hand side, it says support AVRant, and you can send some money directly to Tom and his family via PayPal. So thank you so much to the folks who have done that last week and this week and continuing forward. If you'd like to support the podcast financially just automatically every month, you can do so by going to patreon.com/AVRant podcast. And big thanks to our 133 patrons over there right now. Jefferson, thank you for talking us up to Value Electronics. Vince, thank you for sending me an Amazon gift card for Canadian Thanksgiving and promising to send one over to Tom for American Thanksgiving. That's so nice of you. Stefan, thanks for giving permission for Tom to use your photos on avgadgets.com whenever he is back to being able to be an active editor-in-chief over there again. And then the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Thank you so much to Tony, J. Karl, Donald, Karl, Jonathan, Stefan, Joe, Manuel, Vince, Gurinder, Mark, and Tim. We really, really appreciate those. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. If you want to get your questions answered on this here podcast, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. So, on behalf of Tom Andry and Lee Overstreet, and for AVRant, I am Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.